Once upon a time, now it seems in a past life, Angelica watched a movie about the afterlife. In it, scientists with serious faces argued about how visions on the edge of life and death can be explained from a rational point of view, and people who happened to experience such an experience inspiringly shared their experiences. Many spoke of a dark tunnel and a tantalizing selenium ahead. In front of many also flashed scenes of the past as if showing the cut from a movie. And when Angelica herself was on the threshold, a step away from death, she wondered where the gloomy corridor and memories were. She even looked around, as if it might be somewhere nearby. But instead, all she saw was a field, and what a field it was. The grasses were waist-high, lush and fragrant, mixed with flowers, as if someone had embroidered green silk with semi-precious stones. The sun was blazing, her throat was dry, and her lips seemed as if they would fall with sand if she didn't take at least one sip. Angelica stood on the bank of the wide river, and its refreshing waves gently licked her bare feet. "This is her mother," soothed. That gas the girl realized that she was dressed in a sky-blue sundress, exactly the same as she wore on her 16th birthday. "Mommy." Tears came to my eyes, and I felt so bitter that even the sky darkened and blue clouds covered the horizon. They were rapidly approaching, as if driven by a storm, but around the meadow, as far as the eye could see, not a single hedge. Angelica sat down and folded her palms in a bucket, reached for the water. Now she'll drink? No. A sharp shout made her shudder, and water spilled from her hands in glittering drops. Turning around, Angelica saw her mother, in a light chintz dress, hair curled coarsely. Mommy looked exactly as she was depicted in her youth on Angelica's favorite photo card. Mommy was strong and blooming, just like this meadow around. Angelica smiled. How good it was to see her like this. "Don't drink." Mommy didn't smile and threatened her daughter with her finger. "What are you doing here? You can't be here. It's not time yet." "Why not?" Angelica asked in confusion. For some reason, she could not remember what had happened before she found herself in this meadow. It seems that there, in this early, was very painful and scary. In general, it was not worth remembering. Angelica loved it here in the meadow. She didn't mind to stay here forever. "No way." Her mother put her hands to her sides and suddenly, firmly grasping her daughter under the elbow, dragged her away from the river along the barely visible path. "It's too early for you. You have to leave quickly," mumbled her mother, and Angelica followed her and understood nothing at all. She didn't want to go anywhere, but suddenly a wooden old door appeared in the middle of the field. Just a door, nothing else. "Mommy, I want to stay. Don't take me back." Angelica panicked. She struggled, but her mother was unexpectedly strong. "No, I want to come back to you. Don't take me back. It's bad there." Mom's face contorted with sadness and then infinite love. "I know, daughter, but everything has its time. Your time to live is now." With that, Mom opened the door. It was cold and dark. She pushed Angelica hard, pressed on her shoulders, and the girl with a piercing scream toppled into this icy and somehow rumbling, like a rushing train, darkness. "Archie, she's awake." "Well, at last. Right? Our vitals. Excellent. We're finally pumped. So, quiet. So what if she's out of the ICU? We don't know how much brain damage was done." The voices belonged to one woman and two men, and all the fuss they made around Angelica was tiring her. She was much better. "Where is it?" The vision of the meadow by the river melted rapidly, like a morning fog, and Angelica remembered, understood. Her body was pierced by such pain that she cried out, tried to flounder desperately, but there was no strength. She opened her eyes and immediately clenched them shut, groaning, the room spinning upside down. "Angelica, can you talk?" "It's okay." "Calm down, please. You're safe." She was still opening and closing her eyes, turning her head, feeling the softness of the pillow. Gradually, the room stopped spinning and shaking. Gradually, the world became familiar. Angelica realized that she was in a hospital. Sensors beeped, wires stretched to her arms, bandages on her arms, and below the waist, what seemed like thousands of snakes stinging. I think she complained out loud about that last one. There were 2 doctors and a nurse at her bedside. They all looked anxious, but also cheerful. They spoke one by one, explaining that her life was in no danger, that she was saved. And the boy? Angelique would have jumped up on the bed if she had more strength. "The child is fine," answered the older man with the gray beard. "His father's been found. Everything's fine. Archie took care of you," the nurse said hurriedly as Angelica reached up to touch her face. "There were no bandages on it. You're very lucky your face wasn't hurt." "What?" The nurse glanced resentfully at her colleague who had elbowed her. "It's very important for women." That day, Angelica, having passed the last exam brilliantly and already anticipating how soon she would graduate from the university with a diploma of landscape designer, was returning home. She was a little late because together with her classmates went to a cafe. Naturally, Angelica didn't forget to call Barry to tell him that she couldn't visit his parents today. But in principle, she didn't think it was so bad that they had visited them only yesterday. Barry, being a fiancé, didn't like it when she changed her plans, but he took it normally because he had sworn his love to her. Angelica decided to take a shortcut through the city park. This place meant a lot to her while her parents were alive. They used to walk here with the whole family. The park had a rectangular shape, but in one place it seemed to branch off a small section, something like an alley. Angelica knew that once there was a private house with a lush garden, and here, in fact, this section was its remains. Trees and shrubs had grown here. Everything was wild, abandoned. In the back of the plot stood a house, or rather, its remains, a fragile wooden structure, which was to be demolished from one day to the next. Angelica walked by and suddenly stopped. Something was wrong here. The girl suddenly smelled smoke. Squinting her eyes, she looked at the house. Was it just a show or? No, it was. Tongues of flame looked out of the first floor window. The house was on fire. Angelica quickly pulled out of her purse a phone and called the fire department. Meanwhile, the fire, judging by the characteristic odor and appeared outward clouds of smoke, rampant evil, greedily devouring the dry wood. "Wow!" exclaimed a passerby who stopped next to Angelica. "Firemen should be called." "I already have," Angelica replied. She couldn't understand what else was bothering her so much, besides the fire that threatened the park area. The road with the rushing cars was very close by, so it was hard to understand what was the matter. "I've read that in fires." "Quiet," Angelica interrupted the passerby. "Do you hear?" "What?" The man rounded his eyes. "I don't hear anything." There's a child." Angelica now clearly recognized the call for help. And indeed, look. The passerby stretched out his hand, pointing to one of the windows of the second floor, in which a tiny silhouette flashed and disappeared. A crowd began to gather around. People were talking, wondering when the fire department would get here, and some were already filming what was happening on their phones. "There's a man, it seems," said some grandfather standing with his grandmother. "We need help." "Where?" The old lady stopped him. "Can't you see it's collapsing? Firemen will come and save everyone. That's their job. Do something," Angelica exclaimed. She looked around helplessly. Can't anyone help?" She could understand people. The flames and smoke looked creepy. But she also couldn't just stand there and stare, realizing that there was a baby inside the house. "Girl, where are you going? You're crazy, right? You're going to burn. Stop, you idiot." She was shouted at, but Angelica didn't listen. She tore her scarf from her neck and wrapped it around her face and rushed to the door of the house. "Baby, where are you?" Screaming in a room where she could hardly see anything because of the smoke was a bad idea. But Angelica thought of only one thing. She had to find the baby. She thought the scream came from somewhere up ahead and up, a staircase. The girl rushed down it and the steps creaked threateningly. A corridor, many doors. Which one is it? Angelica swung open the first one at random, and she saw the boy standing with his hands pressed against the stabbed window. "Baby, I'm here." The girl rushed at him and pulled off her scarf, threw it over the child's head. "Get down." Like lightning came the thought. It seems it is necessary to keep closer to the floor. There is more clean air. Angelica begged herself not to think of the worst, that they will not be in time. She heard from the street came the howling sirens of fire engines, which meant, come on. She hoarsely encouraged the child and coughed hoarsely. How did the kid of 5 years old find himself here? Where are his parents? However, all thoughts that can distract from survival here and now away. Again the stairs. This time the steps did not creak. They just fell under the feet of those who were walking. Angelica, shrieking, pushed the boy forward down to where the exit from the house, freedom, life itself was already visible. "Run!" she shouted and struggled to get out of the trap. Legs from below as if dipped in lava, and Angelica realized with horror that it seems that the fire started in the house in several places at once, including the basement. The strength left the girl as suddenly as if someone unknown turned a lever in her to the off position. Angelica felt that the air scalding, poisoned by burning, penetrated into her lungs, filled them. Her head suddenly became so impossibly light. And then she slipped into blessed darkness. Then there was a flood meadow by the river, Mom. And then welcome to reality, where there was so much pain. After the doctor's visit, Angelica soon fell asleep. This time without any visions or dreams, she just rested, her body restoring its resources. When she woke up again, she found the doctor beside her, the same one from the previous trio, the younger one. He said that Angelica's overall health was not as bad as it could be. What was the truth? She asked. The girl had already realized that her head, her arms, her hands, the upper half of her body in general, were lucky they'd been damaged by the fire. But things really weren't all that bad. I mean, it was scary, but it paled in comparison to what was wrong with her legs. Not only were they completely covered in bandages, but they also felt strange. In general, it was as if there was no pain at all. The body was very good at taking the appropriate drugs. But just this part of the body felt. It felt so that Angelica assumed that when the effect of the drugs would weaken, everything would be just awful. She also remembered how she had fallen into a scorcher, remembered how the cutting pain from the sharp boards made her scream like a wounded animal caught in a trap. The doctor mumbled something about her general condition. Then he looked almost guiltily, maybe because Angelica thought that they could not save her completely, and he told the truth. That her legs, as well as her thighs, were all very badly damaged. The extent of the burns and the nature of the injuries that complemented them all meant only one thing. Treatment would be long and expensive, after which another period of rehabilitation would be required. Unfortunately, there would be scars left behind, the doctor finished. Plastic surgery can correct the situation somewhat, but you just don't worry. The main thing is that you are alive. Angelica nodded. She was not a doctor, but she understood something in life, and for some reason the realization that it seems with her now will remain forever bodily disfigurement, it was taken calmly. It was even creepy, because at the same time Angelica thought about the fact that it comes out, she will no longer be able to wear shorts in the summer, short skirts and dresses, and on the beach? No way. Could this be the way things would turn around in an instant? My family, the girl suddenly exclaimed. It was another strange thing that until now Angelica had been immersed only in her own worries. And now she thought that her relatives must have long ago rushed to look for her and worried. There was a phone in your purse, the doctor smiled, and in it was an address book. Your family has already been contacted and they know what happened to you. Angelica felt two feelings, relief and confusion, because where's everyone? Not that she thought that near her bed should stand frightened loved ones with flowers and bags of oranges, but it had been hours since she came to her senses. She was not in the intensive care unit, and judging by the selenium outside the window, it was daytime. Hence, she just waited, she thought it would be natural for someone to come to her. And as if the universe answered her pleas, he entered the room. Barry. Honey, hi. The groom's lips trembled. His eyes expressed all the pain he felt at seeing Angelica in front of him. Barry. Angelica smiled. How are you? He entered the room and took her hand. Doctor, what's wrong with her? The doctor cast a glance at Angelica as if to ask who this is and how do you, patient, feel about being told about your condition. Barry is my fiancé, the girl explained. What were you doing there? Asked Barry sternly. Angelica was used to the fact that her lover's moods changed frequently, but still these changes often took her by surprise. And now she was a little offended. Could he not be a little more affectionate when she was in such a state? You'd think the firemen wouldn't have done their job. Barry, here was a baby. I heard it, snorted the boy mockingly. So what? He wasn't worth the fact that you nearly burned to death. But you were lucky. He gave her an attentive look. He wrinkled his nose and she realized he appreciated what her hair had become. It will grow back. Angelica smiled timidly. All the fear she had endured in the burning house was now receding, vanishing. She felt safe and at peace because he was Barry, her favorite, most dear man. They had met only a year ago, but from the first meeting, it seemed that they had known each other forever. Barry was Angelique's first love. She confessed it to one of her friends, and she wondered if Angelique was too old for first love. It's usually experienced earlier than 20-somethings. What does it matter when it comes? Laughed the girl. The main thing that I love. In general, Angelica did not grow up quite a recluse. There had been some light romances in her life before Barry, but nothing that would make her heart sink and make her seem the happiest on Selene. Archie, Angelica looked helplessly at the doctor. Please explain what's wrong with me, because I didn't understand anything. I mean, I realized that I was burned. You speak clearly. I just don't understand all these terms. Of course I'm sorry. Archie was embarrassed. Once again he was wrong, because his more experienced colleagues told him that he should not pour terminology on patients, that a good doctor should be able to convey everything in understandable words, and Archie really wanted to be a good doctor. Archie spoke up. He tried not to give negative prognosis and to give hope. He did not forget to add that Angelica's condition was excellent, and then he talked about the fact that the possibilities of modern medicine allow. So you're saying she's going to stay ugly? And what's there? Barry pointed his finger at the blanket that covered Angelique. It's gonna be a burned, wrinkled mess? I didn't say that. The doctor swallowed nervously. He was young, of course, but he knew all sorts of reactions of relatives and friends of patients to reports of injuries, necessary treatment, and so on. And what was going on with Barry? He didn't like it at all, because ever since that guy had been explained what had happened to his fiancé, he had changed. Barry, what are you talking about? Angelique said, confused. I'm alive. And the scars, there's plastic surgery now. Yeah? Barry stretched out. How much is it? Archie announced the cost and Angelica's fiancé whistled. You can buy an apartment in the center and a car with that. Now he looked at his fiancée coldly, evaluating. And a dozen of these women. No, I did not sign up for such a thing. That's it. There's not gonna be a wedding. Barry. Angelica felt dizzy. Her fingers frantically crumpled the blanket. My darling. Don't get hysterical. Barry jerked away the hand that Angelica had tried to catch him with. I was going to marry a normal woman. His face contorted with a nasty grimace. I didn't have time for you. And now it's over. Barry pointed with his eyes at the same blanket under which Angelica's body was. What kind of pervert goes in there when it's like a roast pig? That's it. Shut up. And don't call me. He left the room, pushing a nurse with his shoulder on the way, who almost dropped the tray on which she was carrying food for the patient. Angelica stared silently at one point. At first she really wanted to cry. But then, not a single tear spilled from her eyes, as if the flames that had devoured the house had belatedly reached her now, drying up her tears. Angelica leaned back on the pillows. Please leave me alone, she asked the doctor, who was about to say something. We'll leave you. You'll rest, you'll sleep. Naomi, a nurse of 20 years' experience, came into the room. In general, she did not work in the burns department, but having heard about the heroine she had come to visit once again, she took it upon herself to bring her lunch. In general, theoretically, Angelica slept through lunch, but Naomi went to the canteen and brought everything. She also saw to it that she told her friend in the kitchen to put a bigger and tastier piece of fish in this particular portion. Here all the same size and equally tasty, said Lucy, who worked in the kitchen. What about her relatives? They don't spoil her with homemade food. They haven't shown up yet, Naomi confided. They say she has no mother or father and was brought up by her aunt. So, Naomi nodded with the look of a person who understands the most complicated vagaries of life. I think it's not all smooth sailing. You don't know them at all, snorted Lucy. I don't know, but only. If they loved her, her relatives, they would have all rushed there long ago. They were called, told what happened, but they are not in a hurry. That's right, sighed Lucy. Poor thing. Oh, there are buns today. For dinner? Yes, but they're ready. Here, take it to her. Let her eat it right now, with raisins. Naomi entered the room and placed the tray on the bedside table. The body is like a starship, honey. It needs fuel. So you'll eat now, and then sleep. Rest. Thank you, replied Angelica in a colorless voice. I don't feel like eating at all. You'll have to. Naomi shook her head. Otherwise I won't leave. And then, was it for nothing that I took buns in the canteen? With raisins, by the way. Late that night, Angelica's phone rang. She picked it up, carefully brought it to her ears so as not to touch the bandage. Angelica, you're alive. It was the sonorous, singing voice of Sonia, her best friend. Of course, alive if I'm talking to you. I'm in the village at my grandmother's. I would have rushed to you, you know. Oh, it's a long way to get to you. And my grandmother had a kidney attack. It's happened before, but it's still scary. It's okay, Angelica sighed. Really, Sophia, I'm fine. You look after your grandmother. I'll be home soon, said her friend. Here, mother and father will return from a business trip, and they will go to grandmother, and if it works out, then in general, it will take her to the city. Oh, Angelica, why did you have to go to that house, huh? Well, you're a hero. How was the boy, by the way? They say he's fine, said Angelica. I heard the nurses say that he did not even have a jacket on fire. I thought when I woke up about him, I thought maybe he was a street kid, but he has a father, so everything is fine. What good? Sophia grinned. Wretched father. Normal parents do not have children in abandoned houses. We don't know what the situation is there. Angelica stood up for the unknown parent. Maybe they are poor. Wait, Sophia on the other side suddenly rustled something. There was a click of the keyboard. My grandmother is old, but she's advanced, my friend said. She has a computer. I'm just here for her to start a movie for her Brazilian series. Listen, I just glimpsed the news today. Well, and then they told me about you, the head of the university, and I somehow missed it. Wait a minute. All right. Well, Frank, you better sit down there. You're already in the news. What? Angelica was confused. What do you mean? And what, according to you, no one is not interested to know about the superhero who took the little things out of the fire. In general, there is an article about you. Here, they say that the girl saved. Wow. And the boy is not a bum. Really? That's good. I hope his parents will take care of him now. Yeah, they'll take care of him, her friend said. Wow. His father is an oligarch. What do you mean? Angelica didn't understand. Here, I read here. John, businessman of the year of our city. Wow. What a handsome man. He's a social lion, as it were. What's that got to do with it? Angelica sighed. The main thing is that his son never got into such a situation again. It's fantastic that he was in it, her friend muttered. Oh, that's great. You're a star now. Soon, probably, journalists will come for an interview. I don't want any interviews, Angelica complained. I want to rest. That's it, rest. Get well, said Sophia, and Angelica said goodbye to her. Angelica sighed as this day dragged on endlessly long, agonizingly slow. It had already been more than 24 hours since she happened to be near this old house, and only now she stopped seeing the thirsty, merciless flames when she closed her eyes. And then the phone rang again. Angelica frowned. It was Julia calling, her distant relative and the person who had been Angelica's guardian since her parents had died in a car accident. Julia was not, as she said many times later, to put an orphan around her neck, but she did, when she grew up. Angelica realized that it was done to look good in the eyes of numerous relatives, and most importantly, because Angelica inherited an apartment. A small apartment, not an apartment, but an apartment. Naturally, Julia could not dispose of Angelica's property freely, but she expected that when Angelica turned 18, they would do something. To be more precise, it was planned that Angelica would sell the apartment, give the proceeds to Julia, and she would use them to improve and expand her own living space, in which Julia promised her, by the way, to give her a whole room to live in. However, Angelica refused the offer, because by the time she was 18, she had only dreamed of leaving Julia's house. No, she could not say that there she was exceptionally mistreated, tyrannized, and yet, Angelica was happy to no longer have to live under the control of strict Julia and follow every day of her rules. So Angelica kept her parents' one room and moved there right after she celebrated her 18th birthday. And now Julia was calling for something. Angelica took the call. "My poor girl, how are you?" "Oh, what a grief." "Aunt Julia, I'm fine. I'm alive. My arms and legs are still in place, just a little bit burned." Angelica smiled. Auntie asked about her health, apologized for not visiting her yet, because it so happened that the youngest in the family grandson, Julia, fell ill, and the eldest is in big trouble at the university, threatening expulsion. "Well, we thought that in principle, you're in the hospital, you're well taken care of. Is the food good?" "Delicious," Aunt Julia sighed Angelica. "Well, that means they're looking after you, and you can come to you? They let me in?" "Yes." "Oh, poor thing." Julia wailed again. She talked about how it was a hard blow, but they, as a family, had to stick together. "You're an invalid now." "What?" Angelica's eyes widened. "No, Aunt Julia, it's not that bad. It will require, of course, treatment." "Move in with us," the relative said hurriedly. "You can't live alone in your condition. Expensive all this, of course." "Aha." Angelica tried to move her leg and immediately grimaced at the sharp pain. And how she would walk, she had no idea. Julia kept saying that the treatment was expensive, that now Angelica would need everything. Then she transferred to the fact that they, of course, will help their relatives. But only they themselves are in money trouble, which means we need to urgently sell the apartment. "Your place, Angelica, now just at a good price can go. We'll sell it, put the money on the account. Well, you, of course, a little. And me." Julia announced her proposal cheerfully, as if it had already been approved and could not be canceled. "I'll take care of you. I can't quit my job, but I have a friend who will help as a nurse. I'll buy you everything you need, Aunt." "Aunt Julia," Angelica tried to speak politely but firmly. "Thank you for the offer, but I'm not going to sell the apartment. Why would I do that?" On the other side there was silence, diluted by Julia's unhappy sniffing. Angelica thought of a snake hissing, and immediately the girl gave herself a mental backhand saying, "Well, what kind of nonsense? What kind of insults to relatives? Don't you realize that you have no one?" Julia said in a ruthless tone, "You're ugly now. What's your future? You won't get married. You'll be alone all your life. Me, my family, that's all you've got. You think I don't know Barry's gone? I know everything, honey. Men, they love eyes and hands. What kind of pervert would touch you now? So, think. You can still do the right thing. You'll finish the institute, go to work. We'll live together as a family. Catherine gave birth, you'll be her nanny. You won't have children of your own, understand? Because men will shy away from you when they realize you're crippled. So come on, agree, or else. You'll die alone and only 40 cats will be around you." "Aunt Julia." Angelica suddenly felt so funny that she couldn't hold back. 40 cats is such a tired joke. It's embarrassing to say that. You say I'll be alone? Well, better alone than with a family like yours. You think I left you by accident when I turned 18? I was sick of you. I couldn't stand it. You know." Angelica wiped the tears from her eyes. "The doctor says that I need peace. So do not call me anymore, and especially don't come here. I thought that after all, we are related people. And you." Having finished talking, Angelica leaned back on the pillow and closed her eyes. How tired she was. But no matter how tired she was, she had to hold on. She dozed off again. In the evening after dinner, she remembered that she had seen missed calls on her phone, but because of the snake-attacking conversation with Julia, she had overlooked it. Now Angelica called them back. There were several classmates and teachers, the rector. They expressed sympathy, wished her a speedy recovery. The rector said that his wife was a medic, well-versed in medicines and could help. Look for where to sell the necessary drugs. Angelica thanked him and said that so far she seemed to have everything. Actually, the doctor had already recommended some medicines, but the girl was just embarrassed to burden outsiders with her problems. "Angelica, we're here to see you. Only now, today, we found out." Angelica smiled. She came to visit the guys from the Institute, Austin, Alice, and Steve. "All heard to you." Austin winked and held out a bouquet of pink hyacinths. "For a positive mood. Here's more," he rustled, taking out juice, candy, a package of sliced cheese, a bag of fruit. Soon there wasn't enough room on the nightstand by the bed. "Guys, why so much?" "Oh, it'll fall. Angelica caught a pack of almond cookies that almost fell on the floor. Thank you. Thank you so much. Steve sat back in his chair, put his foot on his leg, and looked around the room with a serious look. It's a nice suite. Are you getting discharged soon? The doctor says in a couple of weeks or so. We talked some more about how things were going at the university, about what to do next. Angelica, when her friends left, felt happy. After all, no matter what evil Aunt Julia fantasized, she was not alone, so she'll get through this somehow. The next day, Dr. Archie carefully reported that journalists wanted to talk to her, but he did not let them in, saying that visiting relatives is one thing, and communication on disturbing topics is another and can be harmful to a recovering person who needs peace. Thank you, thanked Angelica, who didn't want to talk to the press at all. Because what's there to talk about? Well, I saved a boy. So what's next? Let the kid live well and let his father or whoever else he has in his family not allow anything like that. The doctor left. Angelica could not allow herself to sleep on her side. On her back was tiresome and seemed terribly uncomfortable. But she had to put up with it, close her eyes. What is this? She was jerked out of her slumber by the nurse's indignant voice. Visiting hours are over. Man, stop right there. You're not supposed to be visiting now. I'll call the guards. Then the nurse was silent and a male voice unknown to Angelica quietly addressed her, and then its owner appeared in the doorway of the room. Wow, Angelica thought, how spectacular. Generally, she was not fond of male appearance, but this stranger made an impression. Tall, brown-eyed with a masculine chin and a light stubble, dressed in a business suit, a snow-white shirt unbuttoned exposing the sharp articulation of the collarbones and a gold chain. The last detail of the image seemed terribly funny to Angelica. She thought that gold chains were worn only by gangsters of the 90s. The girl could not resist and laughed, snorting not gracefully at all. It would be necessary, Angelica thought, to ask the doctors if the medication she was given had a side effect in the form of an inappropriate sense of humor. The stranger raised an eyebrow questioningly. What was so funny about him coming into the room? But he didn't ask anything about it, instead introducing himself as John and adding that he was the father of the rescued boy. Yeah, Angelica smiled. Hello, how is he? Jacob's fine. You saved him. I don't know how to thank you. He stepped closer, and Angelica lowered her eyes in embarrassment. She wasn't used to being thanked for anything, and even now it seemed unnecessary. And besides, she couldn't bear to look into his piercing brown eyes. How strange it was. Definitely, she thought, definitely, it's all this perception of reality. It's because of the experience, and maybe it's because of the medication after all. And then she said something she didn't mean to. You better watch your son, Father of the Year. John arched an eyebrow again. Actually, I wasn't the one who looked after him. All the more reason. Angelica pounded the bed with her fist. It's dangerous to leave your children with strangers. And where was his mom? We don't have a mom. A gloomy shadow slid across the man's face, but it disappeared immediately. She died when he was born. Oh, Angelica's cheeks flushed. I'm sorry. I sympathize. It's all right. It was a long time ago, he said and stepped closer. Unfortunately, the nanny was negligent, but it's my fault too. I should have chosen my staff more carefully. And you? How are you? His gaze seemed to explore her from top to toe. Angelica wanted to say that she was fine, but that would be a lie. She didn't regret for a moment, not for an atom, that she had saved the boy, but she just couldn't deny that she had suffered a nightmare. It had ruined her life. She had been abandoned by the man she loved. Doctors say that she will need a long treatment, and she is just a student, just getting a diploma. She seemed to have her whole life ahead of her. But how to live this life now? She is now. The fiancé and Aunt Julia were right. She has become ugly. How can she walk and live with her legs like that? Why did this happen to her? Angelica poured out her soul, her thoughts, her fears, and her pain. She cried and talked. She sniffed her nose and wiped it with the corner of the sheet. She roared heartily and was not ashamed of it at all. At last, apparently attracted by the sounds of hysterics, the very nurse who had been present at Angelica's awakening appeared in the room, as well as the two doctors. Angelica, through a veil of tears, realized that they were insisting that the visitor leave because the patient clearly had no time to talk. She saw how the man, this John, was looking at her and what was reading on his face? Pity for her. And it made Angelique weep more than ever because it made her feel ugly. Then John left. The doctor brought her water, offered her some sedatives to drink, and she agreed, and then she finally fell asleep. The next day, when breakfast was served, Angelica finally stopped being so immersed in herself and even talked a little with her roommates. They had gotten to know each other earlier. There were two of them, a woman in her 50s. Her name was Maria. Both of her hands were injured. She had knocked over some soup from the stove when the kids were spinning under her feet. Fortunately, the children were not hurt. The second was a young Selena. She was unlucky when they went out into the countryside to barbecue someone who did not know what splashed into the fire to ignite the flame hotter, and it went up in a wave. The one who splashed managed to bounce, but Selena did not, and she suffered left side, shoulder, and part of the back. Angelica sympathized with the neighbors, and very embarrassed because they unanimously recognized her as a heroine for saving the child. And your fiancé will still realize who he lost, but it will be too late, consoled her Selena. Bastard scoundrel. But it's good that now revealed what he is, and not later, when they would have already married. The truth of life, supported her Maria, and the on in place you correctly put. Look, on the apartment accelerated. Naturally, they talked about many things among themselves. And then, after dinner, suddenly a huge basket was brought into the room. "It's Hetty, man," said the nurse Naomi, putting her burden down on the table. Dr. Harvey came in after her. "Is that for me?" Angelica stared in amazement at the fancy mountain of flowers and exotic fruits. "Is anyone allergic to flowers?" Naomi asked. "We don't have a vase, sorry. And there's a base with artificial moist soil in the basket itself," Angelica said, looking inside. "But who's it from?" "From the boy's father," the nurse explained. "What a luxury. He paid for all the drugs you were prescribed," Harvey said. "That's a manly thing to do," said Maria, who, together with Selena, was curious about the rich gift for their neighbor. Angelica did not know what to say, and then the doctor added something that almost made her speechless. It turned out that John asked him to recommend which private clinic Angelica should go to for quality treatment after she was discharged from the hospital. John decided to pay in full for everything she might need in the future, including the services of a plastic surgeon, and he also gave her his cell phone number to call if she needed anything. But I, Angelica whispered, "You know, pride is a good thing," Harvey sighed, adjusting his glasses. "But if I were you, I would agree. Understand, you are really very seriously hurt. Burns and injuries seriously affect your quality of life and your abilities in the future. And since this man feels it's his moral obligation to support you, I think it's foolish to refuse." "Say yes," Maria said quietly. I remember when I went with my first, I fell on the ice in winter. The bruise was the entire 5th point. And what do you think? My husband-in-law, at least take pity, at least bring ice cream or Apple's favorite. But no, only grumbled that I say in hospitals lying around. Why? I had to look at the preservation after all. The fall was not serious. In general, he grumbled that I couldn't manage the household alone. Up at him. And here, no, Angelica, definitely do not dare to refuse. "I agree," sighed Angelica and reached for the basket. She chose one fruit, pink, funny, with scales, and remembered how it is called dragon fruit. "Girls, help yourselves, and you please too," she smiled at the doctor and the nurse. Lying in the hospital, of course, was no fun at all, but soon Angelica got used to her new routine. It turned out that the food here was also not bad, and also, with the help of Selena, once ordered a pizza courier was not allowed beyond the threshold of the hospital for some reason, but the same nurse ran for the order, and she, of course, treated. Doctors said that Angelica's body was recovering at an astonishing rate. Soon the girl could even walk a little, but had to lean on crutches. And the awarding of diplomas solemn, she, unfortunately, realized that she would miss. One day a woman came into the ward. Angelica did not pay much attention here, often went to visit her neighbors. The girl leafed through a fresh issue of a magazine on floriculture. indulging in dreams that someday she will have a cottage where she will be able to create a magical garden where there will be everything she loves. Angelica, a stranger stopped by her bedside. "My name is Betty. I'm from Glamorous City magazine. Can we talk?" "Hello," said a confused Angelique. "But you're a journalist, and no, I'm sorry, but it's hard for me to think about the fire. And then, I didn't do anything like that." "Actually, we already did a story about that fire." The woman pulled out a chair, sat down on it, took out a smartphone from her purse, and clicked something on it. "You don't mind the tape recorder?" "I do." Angelica struggled to sit up on the bed. The unknown lady started to adjust the pillow under her back. "Don't, I'll do it myself." Angelica waved her hands. "I'd like to talk to you about your relationship with John Stone." "What relationship?" "Well, dear, there is no need for this unnecessary modesty," grinned the journalist. "Your affair is already the talk of the town. It's just fantastic. You saved his son, and he fell in love with you. Seeing a good soul, it's so romantic." "Wow." Maria was listening with curiosity from her bed. "We haven't noticed anything like that, have we, Selena?" "We're not having an affair." Angelica rounded her eyes. Her heart beat faster. What a silly thing to say. Who could have thought it up? "What do you mean, we're not?" Betty squinted her eyes, and it was clear she didn't believe her. "I understand that you are afraid to publicize your relationship, because the girl of the heir to the Stone clan will be so much attention. But believe me, I just want to know the truth in details. I promise, I'll let you read the draft of the interview, and if you want, we'll edit it. We're not having an affair. Look, I don't know who told you such a stupid thing. Can you please leave?" "Actually, it's not our magazine's policy to pay," Betty pouted. "Publication with us is a gift to anyone who wants to be recognized, but $30,000 for an exclusive will do." "What?" Angelica felt like crying at the nonsense going on here. "Go away, please. I'm not going to tell you anything." "Archie," she noticed a familiar doctor walking down the corridor. The journalist was clearly annoyed at being turned away. She snorted, picked up her smartphone, threw Angelica a disgruntled look and left. "And my story," Selena said. Angelica had lied to her friends about being discharged on Tuesday. She was being discharged on Monday. She just felt uncomfortable. She felt like she was already being taken care of too much. So, why burden people, good people who have lives of their own? It's not hard to call a cab, and luckily there's an elevator in the house, so it's easy to get to the 8th floor. Angelica said goodbye to her neighbors on the ward. They were discharged later. They even exchanged phone numbers, and Angelica realized she had new friends. Angelica stood on the hospital porch, leaning on crutches, a bag with things on the floor next to her. The cab was delayed. Looking for it, she didn't pay attention to the black foreign car that entered the yard. Suddenly she saw John. He got out of that car, again in a suit, but now with a tie, and in his hands a huge bouquet of scarlet roses. Angelica looked at him dumbfounded, and he was getting closer. "Congratulations on the discharge," said, and held out the bouquet, but immediately embarrassed because the girl's hands were busy with crutches. "What are you doing here?" "I came to pick you up." "What do you mean?" "If I'm not mistaken," he nodded at the bag, "you were discharged today. I can give you a ride." "Thanks, but I already called a cab. It can be canceled." "You can, but you don't have to." Angelique raised her chin proudly. "I am deeply grateful to you for helping me financially, but really, I myself. You're not refusing because you're afraid to get into my car." The man's eyebrow rose up mockingly. "No, of course not." "Then what's stopping you from accepting my offer?" Angelica closed and opened her mouth. She really didn't know what to say. And before she found it, a new actor, Aunt Julia, appeared in the hospital courtyard, as well as her son. "My girl, well, we made it. How are you?" "Oh, you poor thing. So young and an invalid." Angelica had never thought about how unpleasant and luscious her relative's voice was. Angelica cringed at the sight of these people she least wanted to see on the day of her discharge, when all she wanted to do was to slowly begin to return to normal life. And then Angelica was shocked because Julia had decided that she was going to live with them, because there's no way an invalid could live on her own. "I'm not going anywhere," Angelica replied sharply. "Oh, girl," waved her aunt's hands. as she was a fool, so she remained. Son, take her bag and come on. Carry it to the car. Stop. John intercepted the limb that reached for the bag. She said she didn't want to go with you. Who the hell are you? Our Angelica's sick. We're her family. We're here for her. And this is the first time we've seen you. Man, get away. Julia started yelling. John, Angelica said with determination, please take me home. She realized that she agreed and wanted to get out of here as soon as possible, especially since the cab was running late and there was no moral strength to withstand Lita's aggressive preoccupation. Nodding, John beckoned with his hand to his driver, who had been waiting in the car all this time. He got out, took Angelica's bag and loaded it into the trunk. John himself, estimating the 6 steps of the porch, suddenly picked up the girl in his arms. Ouch! Angelica squeaked. It hurt a little because he carried her under his knees, that is, touched the injured part of the body, but more she squeaked from surprise. Let go. You're on crutches. There's a risk of falling. Why else would you break your legs? He arched an eyebrow. It's been enough, poor thing. He gently set her on the ground and opened the car door for her. Angelica, thanking him, ducked into the cabin. How great it was to leave Julia's mouth open in amazement. Man, what are you doing? Who are you? Julia almost shrieked and ran to the car. Are you kidnapping her? Kidnapping? Angelica couldn't see the look on John's face, but she could tell from his tone. I'm just helping her. Why would you do that? Who the hell are you? Her fiancé, John answered, and the aunt was silent as if her voice had been cut off. He got into the back seat next to Angelica and slammed the door and told the driver to go. What was that? Angelica asked. What bride? Well, everyone knows about our relationship, John replied with a nonchalant expression. Angelica frowned. She remembered the journalist and her words. But what do journalists, such fictitious people, write? But why is this man, who had been behaving decently and generously helping her, talking crazy? What is this nonsense? Angelica asked. What bride? Calm down. Stress has a negative effect on the immune system. John smiled at her. I'll explain everything to you. Except what he said didn't explain it. It confused it even more. It turned out that John had a longtime girlfriend. Her name was Ariana, a socialite, a model, a gorgeous couple. But then it turned out that Ariana had a habit of going out with everyone and she had to be dumped. And as luck would have it, it happened the day before John had to sign a contract with a very serious man, who was known for being very reverent and demanding about the moral character of his business partners. It turned out that the conclusion of the contract was in danger of failure. Then John decided that it was a brilliant idea to spread the word that he suddenly fell in love with a simple, pure, and kind girl who saved his son. Agreed, it's a fabulous story. Judging by his tone, he was obviously proud of his fiction. However, Angelica did not share his enthusiasm. Are you crazy? Without me such a made-up, she waved her hands, and nothing better did not come up with. What if I had a fiancé or a husband? I know that your fiancé left you when he found out about your condition. I agree that it's a bit rambling, but you don't have anything to lose. It won't take long. I just have an important deal to make, and then he shrugged. We'll announce that we've broken up. Is it okay if it's just like that? I might not like it. How so? John reached up and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. Angelica closed her mouth and opened it again. How outrageous this whole thing was. On moral grounds, she squeaked. That's it. But I am prepared to pay generously. That doesn't negate the help you're getting from me and will get to restore your health. Angelique had an itch to slap someone, but then John named the amount. I'm not for sale. She stuck her chin out proudly. It's compensation for helping me, he grinned. Think how many years you'll work for that amount of money. Am I offering something so nightmarish, so immoral? It's like fraud. Come on, John exclaimed. You see, if I make a contract, a lot of people won't lose their jobs. Fathers will have something to feed their families. People won't be on the street. And you're not risking anything. I'm not. He smiled wryly. I'm not asking you to be my real girlfriend. That's the last thing I need. So you're okay with it? I didn't say that. Just think about it. We're here. he said and got out of the car first, giving her his hand. "One thing I ask. Don't talk to the press alone." As soon as the door of the apartment was closed, Angelica sternly told herself not to think about John and his strange proposal, not to think about Julia, and not to think about the outside world at all. Right now there is only her and her own need to rest, to be in peace and quiet, in the comfort of her own home. The girl sat down on the sofa. What a horror. Lon will have to put up with the fact that every movement hurts, and even if she found a wild beach, a piece of riverbank, where there are no people, this year she would have to forget about it. Angelica went to the kitchen to make herself a cup of tea, opened the refrigerator and quietly groaned with frustration, of course. It had managed to spoil a lot of products. She had to urgently do the cleaning, and then, naturally, could not think about going to the store today. She felt insanely tired. Therefore, all the necessary, Angelica ordered a delivery to the house, and then decided to treat herself to pizza. The evening passed under the movie watched a silly romantic comedy in which the protagonist met a rich guy, unaware that he had a twin brother who was going to insidiously destroy their idyll. Then she took the medication prescribed by the doctor and finally went to bed. The next couple of days passed in peace and quiet. Angelica did nothing all day long, eating good food and watching TV. She had plenty of time to think about John's proposal, and she finally made a decision. "We need to talk," she said as soon as he picked up the phone. "Great, we'll talk now. I'm in the driveway. I've come to get you." Angelica looked out of the window. So it is standing and waving a bouquet of roses, this time pink. "Actually, we could have done it over the phone." "Come on," the man grinned. "The weather is wonderful. Aren't you tired of sitting there? How about we go for a ride to a place?" "Where to?" "I won't tell you, because then I'd spoil the surprise." Angelica wrinkled her nose and sighed. Not that she didn't like surprises, but her relationship with this man had clearly gotten very strange, and before things could get even more confused, she needed to make a decision and have a serious talk with him. "Besides, there's one person who wants to talk to you." "Who?" Angelique didn't understand. "My son," she could feel the smile in John's voice. "He keeps asking about you. He wants to thank you for saving him. But if you're busy today, or if you just don't want to." "I do," Angelique said quickly. She suddenly realized that she just needed to see the boy, and even though she knew that he was fine, she just needed to see him alive, healthy, and to tell him that he was very brave in the house. Angelica went downstairs, taking the bouquet. "The flowers will wilt while we drive," she said, burying her nose in the silky sea of pebbles. "Roses smelled just delicious." "No problem," he said. "Give me the keys. I'll go up and put them in a vase. Just tell me where you have the vase." Angelica shrugged. In principle, she would have done it herself, but the elevator was broken, and of course, it would be terribly tiring in her condition to walk up to the 8th floor. John took the bouquet, left, and returned 5 minutes later. Got in the car. "Where are we going?" Angelica stared out the window. "We're almost there," he said, as the car turned from the outskirts of the city onto a road leading to an upscale cottage community. And then the car drove into one of the plots where behind a high brick fence surrounded by a lush garden stood a 2-story mansion. And what a garden it was! The girl burst out a delighted exclamation of amazement when she saw it. Amazing! It was really a beautiful garden with the eyes of a professional. Angelica appreciated that a talented gardener had a hand in it. "Do you like it?" John grinned. "Personally, I've never understood why you'd have to grow so much useless greenery. You shouldn't have done that thing about me being your fiancé." Angelica shook her head. "You and I are nothing alike." "Opposites attract," John smiled. "You seem to love all sorts of things. Plants and flowers? Gardening, creating beautiful things from flora is my life. I've known since I was a little girl that I was going to be a landscaper. I just didn't know what it was called at first." Angelica realized that it sounded a bit pathetic, but it was true. "Let's go inside," John said and led her to the mansion. The door was opened by a woman in a maid's uniform, who led them into a room where a boy was sitting at a small table, concentrating on drawing something. The fairy is here." The boy squealed with delight and rushed toward Angelica, and she leaned forward, which was not easy because of her crutch, and opened her arms to him. "Hello, Jacob. How are you? Good, the boy smiled. You saved me. And you? Are you in pain? You were crying the other day. No, I'm fine now. I went to the hospital and they fixed me up. Are you all right? Almost. Did they give you shots? I'm afraid of hospitals. Not without them, smiled Angelica. But everything is fine now. And you're not sick anymore, right? And I come to visit you. Yes, I'm painting. I got new paints. Do you want to paint? Angelica glanced at John and he nodded. I'm gonna go make lunch arrangements. Actually, Angelica wasn't going to stay for lunch, but then she thought maybe she shouldn't say no. It's just lunch. She spent the next half hour playing with the baby. Jacob turned out to be very smart and cheerful. He liked not only to draw, but also to collect cars from the constructor. Finally, a woman in a maid's uniform appeared in the room, but not the one who had opened the door. You have to put the toys away when you've played, she told Jacob, and the boy reluctantly but obeyed. Are you his nanny? Angelica asked, taking the woman aside. Yes, my name is Sophia. I was hired after the accident. You mean the fire? The woman gave the boy a sympathetic look. He was so scared. You're a hero. Oh, but don't please. Angelica waved her hands, who still couldn't be embarrassed by expressions of gratitude. Sophia understood and stopped, and then shared something with the guest. It turned out that on that fateful day, the boy was out for a walk with Nanny and Ariana. According to the nanny's story, Jacob had a fight with his father's ex-girlfriend and decided to run away from everyone when they were in the park. He managed to sneak away, to get lost, and then he decided to crawl into an old house. Homeless people sometimes went there, and as it was later suggested, it was probably a homeless man who threw a cigarette there carelessly, or maybe he decided to make a fire for some reason. In short, the whole terrible situation arose as a result of coincidence of several events. Sophia also said that John was furious when he found out what had happened. He fired the nanny and broke up with Ariana, realizing that she was the one who had driven the child to tears that day in the desire to run away. Excuse me, there's another maid in the room. Mr. Stone invites you to the table. Jacob, shall we go to dinner? Angelica called out to the boy. I don't dine with Papa, he replied gravely. I only eat breakfast on weekends. I eat in my room. I have a small table there. I'd eat with the nanny. And there is a teddy bear, a bunny, a robot, my favorite toys. Angelica sighed. She just couldn't understand this method of upbringing. How to feed a child separately. When she was little, she always ate at the same table with her parents, and when they came to visit, she was not kicked out. No, still this John, despite what he had done for her, did not like it. When Angelica entered the room, or rather the dining room, she was very surprised, because besides John there was another person there, a man of some years. My dear, let me express my admiration. He stepped to her, caught her hand and kissed her gallantly. In our time, in such an act, you restore faith in the fact that today's youth is worth something. I'm sorry. Angelica was a little speechless, and also a little angry because she was really tired of being praised so often for what had happened. You haven't introduced me to your lovely fiancé yet, have you? How can I ever do business with you in such a case? In a reproachfully jocular tone, the elderly stranger addressed John. I apologize for such an oversight. John smiled. Honey, let me introduce you to Michael, my business partner, the one who will give our company a second wind. From John's meaningful look, Angelica guessed that this was the man for whom he had started this whole adventure to call himself her fiancé. Very nice to meet you, Angelica said. She felt resentment, indignation. Yes, John had helped. He had lent a helping hand when he knew how she had been hurt, but he had not done it out of the blue, but because she had risked herself to save his son. But he thinks that if he puts her in that position, she'll play along with him. I'm sorry, I have something to tell you. Angelica didn't move from her seat when John invited her and his guests to the table, which was already lavishly, restaurant-style set for dinner. I'm not John's fiancé. Michael looked rather shocked. He turned to John. He was shocked too, and Angelica realized he hadn't expected her to be so frank. He must have been 100% sure she would play along. But Angelique just couldn't do that. She hated lies with all her heart, and she said many other important things. That John had put it to her that he wanted. No, that he had decided that she would pretend to be his fiancé. I don't know why he did it. Angelica raised her chin proudly, maybe because she thinks she can buy me. And you know what? Now she turned to John. I'll pay back all the money you spent paying for my medicine. And I'm not taking a penny from you. Yes, I need treatment, and I'll probably need a plastic surgeon too. But I can do it on my own. I'll find the money. I'll earn it eventually. I'll take out a loan. But I will not participate in such dirty games. I'm sorry, she said to Michael and left the room. Fortunately, the door from the dining room led the girl straight into a spacious hallway, the antechamber of the mansion, so she found her way out without getting lost. Angelica cautiously descended the stairs. Her legs, which she had given too much exercise today, were sore. I guess it was still necessary to use crutches sometimes. She turned around, and John wasn't following her. Oh, good. All she had to do was tell the guard at the gate to let her out. Angelica turned off the lawn onto one of the paths and walked between the hedges. It was such a big garden, she wouldn't get lost. However, she was confident in herself and turned into its thickets, just thinking that moving like that, through the thick of the garden, can reach the gate unnoticed. And if she went directly through the lawn, then what else is good? John will jump out, will start to persuade. Well, no. Angelica snorted mockingly. She would not allow herself to be manipulated. Let this rich man not think to himself that he can buy anything he wants, including someone else's conscience. Angelica was so immersed in her thoughts that she didn't notice how the ground under her feet suddenly changed, and now she was treading on soft, loose earth. The girl lowered her eyes and was horrified that she was in the center of the plantings. All around her, recently transplanted plants were visible from the ground, and some of them seemed to have been destroyed by the soles of her sneakers. What? What are you doing? A shout of indignation made Angelica look up, and she saw a guy standing in front of her. Dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, the blond man was holding gardening tools. His cloth gloves were smeared with soil. Shoo! Actually, everything she'd heard now, hearing it was logical in the face of what she'd accidentally done. But this last shoo, thrown carelessly, as if it was not even a person being chased away, but a naughty dog or a bird, had a strange effect on Angelica, and she roared. After a moment, however, it came to her that she was not offended by the shoo, but just became heavy as if suddenly under the weight of emotions and events collapsed nervous system, which strictly speaking, and so already served a decent. I'm sorry, she mumbled through her tears. I didn't do it on purpose. I was just walking. I didn't look under my feet. I'm sorry. I'll be right back. She took a step away. Asters, exclaimed the guy, and Angelica yelped and jumped away from the flower bed, where she almost flew. Give her a hand, the blonde told her sternly. You are swaying for some reason. You will fall. You are drunk. I didn't drink. I don't drink at all. Angelica sniffed her nose and leaned on his outstretched hand. It's just that my legs hurt. Burns. Then you'll forgive me, the boy said softly. You need to sit down. Here, a bench. Thank you. She sat down and stretched her legs. She remembered she'd forgotten to take her painkillers. I'm sorry. I was in a hurry and didn't look where I was going. I'm from over there. She waved towards the house. I was leaving. Why did you come? The blonde asked. To get a job. John's waiting for a tutor for his son. No, I didn't come for that. Angelica sighed. Just visiting. Oh yeah, the guy grinned. You don't look like John's girlfriend. Because I have burns? Angelica grumbled. What? No, I don't. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant. The guy nervously adjusted his glasses. It's just that his girlfriends usually look like plastic dolls. And you're quite lively and pretty. And you, aren't you by any chance the girl who saved Jacob? It's just that you mentioned the burns. Angelica nodded. Don't start talking about what a good deed she'd done. The boy just nodded, however, and then rising, walked a couple steps away and sat down near a small flower bed. Did you have a fight with him? Since you left so quickly. Sort of, she replied. And what's your name? Alexander. The guy smiled, and Angelica thought that his eyes were also brown, a little like John's, but they looked, it seemed so, 1,000 times kinder and warmer. Do you work here? Are you the gardener? You guessed it. Yes, this is all my property. He waved his hand as if to circle the green and flowery expanses. "Great," said Angelique. "Very beautiful. The alpine slide is very original. How did you guess to combine succulents and fescue in it?" "That's so bold." "But the colored pebbles, sorry, distracting. It's a very bright accent." "You know about gardening?" The guy arched an eyebrow. "I'm a landscape designer," smiled Angelica. "Really, just out of university." "So, a collie," Alexander smiled back. "The remark about the pebbles is really interesting. But this is the idea, because the slide will still be changed, and there will be something harmonizing in palette with the bottom of the water stream. This garden," the guy added thoughtfully, "all I have." It was so surprising and strange, but the words, like threads folded into a single lace pattern, added to other words, and Angelica, losing track of time, talked to Alexander. He was 25 years old. He had also received the education appropriate to his business, and now he was ready to seriously transform the garden by removing something, leaving something, and of course creating something completely new. Angelica was not inclined to tell much about herself at the first meeting, but with Alexander it was different, and she did not notice that she opened up as she allowed herself only with her best friends. And then, of course, the day itself reminded how much time they had talked. The sun was already slipping towards sunset. After saying goodbye to the gardener, Angelica returned to her previous route and soon left the grounds of the mansion. No one tried to stop her, and it looked as if John hadn't even come out to look for her when she left so quickly. So let it be, Angelica decided. Let them finally parted. She could live without his financial help. When she got home, Angelica had dinner, read a little, and went to bed. Waking up in the morning, the girl looked at the clock. 10 in the morning. Yesterday's day was hectic, nervous, tiresome, and she had slept so well. However, of course, it also affected her health. Angelica had already begun to accept the fact that her life would never be the same after what had happened. Having cleaned herself up a little, she went to the kitchen, where she prepared a breakfast of cornflakes with milk. At breakfast, Angelica habitually tucked into her smartphone, browsing through her social networking feeds. The smartphone beeped with a bird's trill, notifying her of a new message. Angelica opened it. It was a text message from the bank. It said that a very large amount of money had been credited to her account. The girl froze over a bowl of breakfast cereal. It was something incomprehensible because she was not expecting a paycheck. I mean, Angelica worked, of course, but this spring, on the eve of graduation, she lived on savings because she decided that she needed to focus on the most important thing, that is, on the finals of her studies. She also didn't wait for her debts to be paid back because she never lent to anyone, and the amount was obscenely large. And then the ringtone of the incoming call played. It was John. "Good morning." His voice sounded serene, as if yesterday was nothing so offensive. "How are you feeling? Did you transfer the money to me?" Angelica guessed because she thought there was nowhere else to get such a sum. "I did," John replied. "I don't want anything from you. I'll transfer it all back. There's no need to react so hastily." "Angelica, I must apologize. I shouldn't have started this in the first place. What makes you think you can control me?" "I am truly sorry," John interrupted her delicately, but with emotional pressure. "And I think you ought to accept the sum. But you're a real landscaper now, aren't you?" He interrupted her again. "In that case, could you refuse me a favor?" "What kind of favor?" "I'd like to change the garden. It hasn't been renovated in a long time. You could do it, and I'd pay for it. So the money in your account could be not just, say, my support, but a reward. All is fair." "It's too much even to work on a garden as big as yours," Angelique objected, but not so confidently. "It can be considered a salary, as well as bonuses in honor of the fact that this will be your first order." "Well," the girl stretched out, "but you already have a gardener, and he's very talented. He won't mind if I do something." "Alexander," John grinned, "he's just a servant. If I decide to tear the garden down, his opinion will mean nothing." When she heard that, Angelica clenched her teeth, as some people, John for example, like to boast of their wealth, power, while belittling and humiliating other people. And yet, Angelica understood that sometimes her attitude to the world around her should be held a little. She realized that in her profession, she would have to face all kinds of people, and the ability to keep silent and communicate politely within the framework of her duties, so to speak, was very valuable. Besides, John continued, I've spoken to him. He doesn't mind having an assistant. The garden, as you saw for yourself, is great. I have to think about it. Think about it, but not for long. Angelique, I can promise you that there won't be any more of this. I mean, the way I acted when trying to get you to play along with me. By the way, when are you gonna, I don't know, get this whole affair thing out of the press? I've already officially denied it. You have nothing to worry about. There's a lot of work to be done on the garden, but you don't have to do it. That's what Alexander is for, and if necessary, you'll have more helpers. Angelica thought all day and then at 9 o'clock in the evening called and said that she agreed. Angelica arrived 2 days later, and as if her own body received a command, say, today, we need to feel better this day, she had almost no pain, no itching of the affected places, and in general her health was such that she walked easily, was full of strength and vigor. Over her shoulder was slung what she called her work bag. That is just a very capacious bag where she kept her blotters, notebooks, and other small things for planning future work with the garden. Angelica was excited about her upcoming meeting with Alexander. John had told her that he was not against her participation in the work on the garden, but another person's intrusion into his possessions could bring difficulties. But Angelica was ready for them and decided that in the future the garden would be realized only those ideas that Alexander would really support. She would not insist and argue. Hello, Alexander smiled at her. So it means that I will not work alone. He looked at her carefully. Well, let's see what they teach landscape designers today. Didn't you study? Angelica asked. Not really. I don't have a diploma, if that's what you mean. My teacher was Billy. Have you heard of him? The girl gasped and nodded. Of course you haven't. In his time, this man was known for his ability to create luxurious gardens for the elite of the Soviet Union. He was even allowed to participate in several international exhibitions, and it was believed that his rose gardens are unrivaled even in England itself, where it would seem roses were one of the favorite flowers since the Victorian era. So how did you learn from him? It's just that my grandmother knew him. I mean, her cousin was a dressmaker from whom Billy's wife often ordered outfits. And it just so happened that they met. It's a long story, some other time. Right now, we got more important things to talk about. We talked about the upcoming. Angelica hastened to clarify that personally she would not want to change anything in the garden drastically, for example, to remove trees. It seems to me that a garden is like a stone, the cut of which can be renewed and its beauty emphasized with a skillful setting. I like the way you think, Alexander said. So I suggest that we include this in our project. It turned out that Alexander was really talented and without any diploma. Angelica noted his deep knowledge of plants and the principles of garden design. They talked, listening attentively to each other, then began to argue. Time flew by unnoticed. When it was time for lunch, Alexander went to the house and came back with sandwiches, salad, pie in the style of charlaka, but with pears and bottles of lemonade. We spread a blanket and settled down on the grass. And then, Angelica got used to working together with Alexander very quickly. Soon they started some practical tasks. It was possible to plant perennials. They just had time to get used to the new place before wintering. However, Alexander was always trying to take on the heavy work. Angelica, in response, constantly took offense and never tired of reminding that she, of course, has some health problems. But that does not make her helpless and useless. Alexander as if conceded to her in words, and then when it came to business worked himself, assigning Angelica something easier. Work on the transformation of the garden was carried out not only on the territory of the mansion, so several times traveled to plant nurseries in the suburbs. Once Alexander invited her to an art exhibition where they wandered, admiring the art of the peoples of Africa, talking about life and along the way drawing inspiration for his project. He and she thought to bring a pinch of exoticism. It was strange and surprising, but very soon Angelique began to perceive Alexander not only as a partner in work. She realized it when it started to rain, popped into the nearest cafe to wait out the downpour. They sat down at a table, ordered a non-alcoholic mulled wine, and suddenly, Angelica realized she was no longer hurt by the parting with Barry. Her heart is open for something new. She looked at her interlocutor this time timidly from under the eyelashes and thought, does he have a girlfriend? It seems that so far Alexander had not said anything like that. But for nothing on Selena, Angelica was not ready to make the first step. And then Alexander made the first step. It happened when Angelica once again came to the garden. The day before, a whole mountain of serious work had been completed here, and now there seemed to be little things left. What is this? She asked when Alexander handed her a box. When she opened it, Angelica found a dozen pots. Violets, Alexander replied. You said you wanted something special. And he named her the varieties of flowers that were planted in the pots. Angelica rounded her eyes. She really dreamed of many of them, but thought that these novelties would be on sale only next year. It was so delightful, so tender. Angelica couldn't help herself and threw herself around his neck. Thank you. Actually, that's not all, grinned Alexander, hugging her lightly in return. I'd like to ask you out on a date. But Angelica's eyes faded now. Fear was splashing in them. But you, it's impossible. Why? He asked, and Angelica was ready to scream and cry because, wasn't it obvious? What kind of love? What kind of relationship after what had happened to her? It doesn't matter to me, Alexander said. He stepped closer. His palms gently descended on the girl's shoulders. It wouldn't matter to any normal person. You were beautiful. You stayed that way. And what happened? I'm only sorry you had to go through the pain. But you're the most beautiful girl on Celine to me. Angelica couldn't hold back her tears, and he was silent for a while, just hugging her, letting her spill out the pain and nightmare of the past. And then when she felt better, he asked again if she would go out with him. And Angelica said yes. The relationship was fast-paced and leisurely at the same time. Although Angelica accepted Alexander's soothing words with all her heart, she didn't feel ready for them to become lovers, and he was in no hurry. Sometimes he came to visit her. They could watch TV together, play a board game. Several times he took her by car to a private clinic where she was undergoing treatment. He joked that this way she could save money on cabs, and she realized he was spending time to support her morally, to cheer her up. So, no way tonight? Angelica was on the phone with Alexander. It had been about 3 weeks since the beginning of their romantic relationship, and the girl hoped that they could go to see a movie as the premiere of a comedy about love. She was a little surprised that Alexander suddenly changed his plans, although it seemed that he had said earlier that he would be free that day. And she didn't like the way his voice sounded. He was very tense. Okay, then please call me when you are free, she said and ended the call. Alexander berated himself 1,000 times for letting his emotions get the best of him. He shouldn't have let everything that was going on in his life hurt Angelica in any way. But then he had to pull himself together. He had a very important job waiting for him. That same day, a man arrived at John's house. His name was Damien, and he was the notary who handled all the affairs of John's father, who had passed away about 3 months before. John's father had been ill for a long time and had had a weak heart since his youth. And even before the funeral, it was discovered that he had written a letter to the son, anticipating that everything might end for him at any moment. In it, he said goodbye to his son, gave him some fatherly instructions, and also asked that John should not be in a hurry to find out the contents of the will. His father had wanted its promulgation for John to take place 3 months after the funeral. John was quite surprised by this decision of his father's, but then he decided that, in principle, he would not oppose his father's last will and testament. And so the day came. Are you ready? The notary addressed John as they entered his father's study. Naturally, Stone nodded and sat down in the chair. The notary took a seat across from him at his father's desk. He began to unfold the papers without hurry. So, can we begin? John was in no hurry, but it seemed strange to him that the notary was slow. He also looked at his smartphone, as if he was waiting for a call from someone right now, during his important working hours. We're waiting for one more person, Damien said. What? What are you talking about? John frowned. I don't understand. His comprehension became even less just to the level of the Mariana Trench when the office door opened and Alexander entered. The gardener had changed his clothes. Usually he wore jeans, some ridiculous motley shirts or plaid shirts. Now he was dressed in a strict dark blue suit, white shirt and tie. Alexander said hello and walked over and sat down in the second chair next to John. "What are you doing here?" John frowned even more, then turned to the notary. "What's going on?" "Please calm down," the man replied. "Everything is happening strictly in accordance with the will your late father expressed, and I have been instructed by him, as his lawyer and friend, to do the following. The fact is, about 25 years ago, your father had an affair." John listened with bated breath. He was basically aware that his father often cheated on his mother. It had eventually led to their divorce years ago, and she had moved far, far away altogether, abandoning her son. She simply said that John was a big boy and she was tired of everything and wouldn't tear him away from his father. That affair was like a fleeting thing. She was just a maid in that house. And then when John's father decided it was time for that fun to end, the woman didn't mind. She only asked to keep her where she was because it was a good job. She never made any claims to John's father. She generally settled her personal life. Married, had a child, divorced. 5 years ago, the woman was diagnosed with oncology and John's father did not leave her until the end, help with medication, treatment. "Why are you telling me all this?" John asked nervously. "I don't understand. And what is he doing here?" John nodded at Alexander, who sat motionless and stared at the portrait of the dead owner of the house and one of the biggest businessmen in the city. "Show a little patience, if you would be so kind. I've come to the most interesting part," Demian replied politely. And then, in a few phrases, he outlined something important. Hearing this, John experienced a real shock. He simply could not believe that it was true. What he heard was that the child born to the maid was his father's child. The woman kept this secret until her death, and John's father, in turn, until his own. He spoke to the son Alexander and was forgiven. He also put him in his will. The last 3 months had been spent preparing all the documents to prove their kinship, as well as legal preparations in case John decided to somehow prevent his brother from getting his share of the inheritance. "No, it's true," the notary interrupted John delicately but firmly and stood up. Alexander stood up after him. "From my position as a person who knows the rules and is familiar with your late father's opinion, I can say that the best solution in this situation is reconciliation. I am not asking you to call me brother." Alexander spoke for the first time. "I do not aspire to be part of your family. I had my own family, but I'm also not going to give up what my father decided to pass on to me." "And why? Why did you work here as a gardener next?" That thought was very preoccupying John now, almost more than any other. "I gave this garden many years," Alexander grinned. "I wanted to give it a proper farewell. Autumn is a good time, by the way. But as of today, I am no longer your gardener, brother. I'm leaving." The door closed behind Alexander. John sat in the chair and looked at the notary. "Is there something you want to ask?" Demian said politely. "How long have you known all this?" "Your father initiated me into everything about 4 months ago, right after he told Alexander about it." "And you've been pretending to be a friend of my family the whole time." John rose from the table. "I did what I was asked to do. And naturally, I have also fulfilled all my obligations in good faith," the notary replied, rising and collecting the papers. "I don't need your services anymore," John spat out. The man was already shaking a little with anger, realizing that he had been deceived cruelly. His own father had not seen fit to reveal to him such an important truth. "Well," Demian nodded, "I had envisioned such a development, but unfortunately, we still have to settle all the questions concerning the inheritance. After that, of course, I will transfer all my affairs to your new lawyer." "Alexander, hello." Angelica called Alexander. It was a surprisingly warm, sunny fall day outside the window. In principle, they had almost finished everything in the garden. Now it remained only to prepare it decently for wintering. This time Alexander answered her with a friendly voice as always, and the girl smiled, sighed with relief. It meant that she was worried that he had something wrong or that something had broken up in their relationship. Angelica asked about when they would do the garden next, but Alexander said they wouldn't be doing that anymore. "What do you mean?" Angelica asked, confused. He answered that other people would take care of preparing the garden for winterization. And in the spring, he can say for sure they will not work together there too at all. "But why?" We better talk about this over the phone. Can I pick you up? We can have dinner together. Well, actually, to tell you the truth, Angelica didn't feel like going out tonight. Why don't you just come to my place? Okay, Alexander agreed. He came, as always, not empty-handed, but with flowers and a treat. This time it was a box of chocolate-covered fruit. I have something to tell you, said Alexander. I'm listening. Angelica smiled warmly. They sat at the table in the small kitchen. The overhead light was out. The darkness was dispersed by the lights from the street and a small table lamp with a purple lampshade. Alexander began his story from afar. He remembered his childhood, how his mother had been evasive in answering questions about his father, how he grew up, in fact, in this Stone's mansion because his mother took him to work with no one to leave him with, and he sat quietly in the servants' quarters. Alexander brought his narrative to how a few months ago the old owner of the house confessed to him that he was his father. And then when he was gone, the lawyer gave him the details of the will. Alexander ended his story at a meeting with his brother. I understand that John, he's not guilty of anything. He didn't know. It's not like we grew up together. Alexander grinned. He didn't socialize with the children of the circle of people my mother and I belonged to. We were in different worlds. And the fact that I have money now, you could say that puts me in the circle of people John belongs to. But it doesn't. It doesn't change anything. I just have money now. That's all. I thought so much about what to say to him. And then I realized there's nothing to say. I can't say I understand you. Angelica reached out to him and covered Alexander's hand on the table with her palm and squeezed it lightly, reassuringly. I can only imagine how you feel. But I've been talking to John. At first I thought he was a wonderful man. He decided to help me. And I realize he's not a bad person, but I don't think you two are alike. You're very different. Earlier, Angelica had shared with Alexander the essence of the whole story, when John suddenly decided that making her his fake bride was a great idea. And for some reason, it seemed to Angelica that this act of John in its own way also affected Alexander's attitude to him, because it showed how easily this man is capable of deception for his own benefit. What are you going to do next? Probably buy a house and start growing my own garden. And also, perhaps, now I can do something that I have long wanted to do. I had a dream to create my own plant nursery. That's great. Angelica supported him. I'm sure you'll succeed. There is one more thing. Please close your eyes. I'll just be a minute. Why? It's a surprise. Angelica obeyed. Alexander went out into the corridor. He opened his backpack, which he almost always carried with him, usually storing a lot of necessary things. But today the backpack was almost empty and there was a long box in it. Carefully opening it, Alexander carried what he had so long and excitedly chosen into the kitchen and put it on the table in front of Angelica. Now you can, he said, and the girl opened her eyes. In front of her in a small ceramic pot was a miniature snow-white orchid, and in the upper flower sparkled, like a frozen dewdrop, a diamond. I want you to marry me, Alexander said. Angelica looked at the ring and 1,000 thoughts ran through her mind, and yet there were no thoughts at all. She only felt. It seemed to her that time had stopped and now she had to make the most important decision of her life. And she made it without a doubt. Another 4 months passed. The height of winter was the worst time for fresh flowers, but on this day everything was in them. The banquet hall of the elite restaurant, where the tables for the wedding feast were set, was drowned in a variety of fresh flowers, which were interspersed with silk ribbons and tiny LED lights, and altogether created a background fabulous, candy romantic. It was a modest celebration to which the most important guests for the future young family were invited. Angelica's former classmates, her best friend, and also those 2 doctors and a nurse from the hospital who were present when she woke up after the fire, and 2 other women who were lying with her in the ward. Alexander had invited his friends, as well as Demian, and John and his son had also come. Angelica could have left everything as it was, but she still decided to have a serious talk with Alexander, and in the end, he decided to try to establish a relationship with his brother. John didn't mind at all. Yes, girlfriend. Who would have thought that such a misfortune would turn out to be such a fairy tale at the end? Sophia, in a candy pink silk bridesmaid dress, approached Angelica. "You're just glowing with happiness." "I'm married." Angelica laughed. She raised her hand, admiring the platinum engagement ring. "Marriage suits you," Sophia smiled. "By the way, you could have thrown the bouquet to me." "I threw it honestly." "Well, who got it?" "Well, nothing. I'll build my happiness without a bouquet." Sophia winked. "You know, this John is not so bad." "Yes, he is in principle not such a bad man." "I was so surprised when Michael, well, the same business partner with whom I confession I broke the deal, suddenly accepted an invitation to our wedding. Can you imagine? Alexander decided to invite him. I don't know what their deal is. He just decided to buy land from Michael to build his nursery." "Wow, how do you know that?" "Well," Sophia smiled enigmatically. "Michael himself told me. We see each other sometimes now." "What?" Angelica exclaimed. "When did you do that?" "Oh, such an interesting coincidence." Sophia winked at her. "We even before you signed, that is, this morning talked. Can you imagine? He said that I am insanely similar to this first love. And since he's a free man now." Angelica nodded. Michael, who was with all his heart for a strong family, was going through a difficult divorce from his wife, who, as it turned out, had been cheating on him for many years. But it seems now he decided to leave the sadness and try again to arrange a personal life. "There you are." Alexander approached the girls. "Can I take my wife?" "Oh, so be it," laughed Sophia and hurried to Michael as her favorite song was playing and she hoped to pull them into a sensual dance. "I love you," Alexander said. "And I love you," Angelica answered him. Her arms wrapped gently but tenaciously around her husband. How happy she was now. And she had no doubt that there were many thousands of happy days ahead of them. What's wrong with me? It's hard to speak. My throat." Angelica sighed and leaned back on the pillows. "Water, please." Her wish was immediately fulfilled by a nurse who introduced herself as Alice, helped her to drink. And then Harvey, the older doctor, spoke. He explained that Angelica had passed out from smoke inhalation and had nearly gotten a concussion after a beam had fallen from the ceiling. But luckily it had hit the back of her head in passing, so it was almost a minor injury. Still, she was admitted to the ICU, from which, thankfully, it was soon decided to transfer her. My hair. It was hardly the right moment to worry about beauty when you'd almost died, but Angelica was terribly concerned for some reason. She had always been proud of her hair and had been growing it out since 4th grade. By the time she was 23, she had gorgeous natural blonde hair up to her waist, thick and silky. No jewelry needed with such wealth. But now, Angelica felt a hollow at the back of her head and at her right temple. There were bandages and she ran her fingers around her head. "Where's the hair?" "Fire," said the second doctor. He looked sympathetic. "Most of the length. Don't worry, it will grow back." And suddenly Angelique cried, bitterly, tearfully, covering her face with her hands, clutching her fingers so tenaciously into it, as if it could ward off what had happened. And after all, nothing foretold trouble.
Victoria stood next to the high panoramic window and thoughtfully looked into the distance. There, where in the depths of her and her husband's large and flowering garden, there was a small, beautiful lake in which huge rainbow carp slowly swam. "Here, look how handsome they are," he said, hugging her. "Jack, they were bought especially for you, so that you could come here at any time and watch our family in miniature." Jack smiled and pointed out to the young woman a pair of beautiful fish moving smoothly under the glass-smooth water column. "Look, the bigger one is like me," the husband continued. "But this beauty with iridescent sides is you, Victoria, his female, his legal wife. You see how happy they are, just like you and me, Victoria." Then for a long time, I looked at the majestic Pisces and thought that she too was now floating in the same way in the middle of the unknown of her own life. And just like these carps, it does not remember itself. The woman slowly shifted her focus from her gaze to the reflection in the window. Tall, almost model height, slender like a tree trunk. Victoria, she had truly beautiful appearance. The platinum blonde, who turned 25 last year, looks like she stepped straight out of the pages of a fashion magazine. However, Jackie said, that's how they met. Like she was a model who was about to finally leave the business that was boring her, and he was a successful banker who managed several branches of one of the largest banks in the country. The husband told her that they met at some art exhibition, either dedicated to Impressionism or vice versa. It was something related to folk crafts. Jackie told her that he didn't remember exactly. I would like to remember at least something from all this. I thought to myself with bitterness. However, no matter how much the businessman's wife strained her memory, no matter how much she tried to reconstruct the events of that fateful day when she was in a terrible car accident and almost completely lost her memory, nothing I couldn't remember other than my name. Her first memory, after she finally came to her senses, was the long road home. The woman remembered the cozy interior of an expensive car in which her husband drove her to their luxurious country mansion, located in one of the most closed and carefully guarded cottage communities. Next to her in the car sat a middle-aged woman, dressed in a chic three-piece sky blue suit. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup could have been the envy of the Queen of England herself. The lady looked to be about 50, but she had a figure like that of Hollywood star. It fit, slender, with a minimum number of wrinkles on a beautiful but slightly cold face. It later turned out that it was the mother Jack, Zoe. The banker's mother owned a large spa complex, so in matters of youth and beauty, she really had no equal, at least in their city. After they arrived home, Jack with Zoe told her in more detail about what happened to her, meaning it's normal that you feel a little lost. Her husband explained to her, the accident you and your driver got into was simply monstrous. The driver died on the spot. And Jackie hesitated as if it was hard for him to talk about it, and he did not know how to choose the right words so as not to shock his already confused wife. Finally, he said, they literally put you back together piece by piece. Your brain was severely damaged, and after doctors performed several complex operations, you had to be put into an artificial coma. Otherwise, you simply wouldn't have survived, my dear. Zoe, who was sitting right there, just silently lowered her eyes and put her palm to her forehead, as if she herself suddenly felt bad from the surge of worries for her daughter-in-law. You were in a coma for almost 6 months, she said quietly. My son visited you every day in the hope that your condition would finally improve enough to wake you up. However, at first the doctors did not give positive prognoses. They said that the chances of making it through were simply, and you could, Victoria. You have conquered death. Well done. When Zoe Konstantinovna looked again at Victoria, there were tears in her eyes. She immediately approached her daughter-in-law and sincerely hugged her. Victoria, there was no choice but to respond to this gesture with a much less tight hug of his. I've been waiting for you so much, Victoria said meanwhile Jack, and he also wiped tears from the corners of his eyes. You just can't imagine how long I've been waiting. Mom says it right. Even the doctors despaired, but I still believed that you would come back to me. Honey, thank God, that's what happened. Now you are home, and I will never let you suffer again. The young woman looked at her husband, and for a tiny moment, it suddenly seemed to her that she had already heard something like that. But it was under completely different circumstances, and which ones, alas, she did not remember at all. She herself felt as if she had slept for several decades in a row. And when she woke up, she found herself in a completely different time and place than where she had once fallen asleep. The woman was haunted by a constant feeling of lethargy and physical weakness, and everything around her seemed somehow completely different from what it should have been. Thank you. Thanks to both of you, answered slowly Victoria. And the mother-in-law finally released her from her too strong. The young woman smiled faintly and added to her husband, I must be very lucky to have such a sensitive and caring family. I will try to remember you and everything that happened before this terrible accident. Zoe, my son, and I quickly looked at each other, but the next second a happy smile flashed on the face of the husband and mother-in-law. Of course, darling, the woman sang, taking her hand. We have no doubt about it. Jack will help you fill in all the gaps that have formed in your memory. To be honest, we have already prepared a little for this. So once you are completely ready to start, just tell us, do you live? And asked unexpectedly, do you live with us? The mother-in-law was taken aback for a moment, as if she did not expect such tactlessness from her daughter-in-law. But then, realizing that this was just an ordinary question, Zoe softened. That's right, dear me. And you and our Jack. We all live together in this wonderful house. I'll keep an eye on you if you don't mind, she said, looking carefully at her daughter-in-law. Jack, we are at work all day. In addition, he is often sent on business trips, including abroad. I think it will be better this way." Victoria turned a questioning glance from her to her husband, and he confirmed his mother's words. "Darling, you have absolutely nothing to worry about. I'm taking some time off now, but I'll have to go back to the office in a couple of weeks. I want to be absolutely sure that nothing happens to you while I'm not home. Mom kindly agreed to help me with this, although her worries are beyond the roof. I'm sure you and Mom will have a great time together. Even before the accident, you were inseparable. Real girlfriends." Jack laughed a low, pure laugh while looking at his mother as if he was looking for her support. She didn't keep herself waiting, and Zoe I laughed too. "Of course, you and I will discuss so many things. We will prepare so many delicious. You won't be bored with me, that's for sure." Mother-in-law patted softly Victoria on the hand, but it seemed to her that the woman did this too faintly, as if talking about their friendship. The husband nevertheless embellished the true words somewhat, Zoe, and her attitude one way or another. But then she did not say anything, but only gave her loved ones another weak smile. She is really very and the only thing she really wanted at that moment was just to get some sleep. Related Victoria did not resist the desire of Victoria and took her to the room designated for her. Almost a year has passed since that moment, but the young woman has not advanced one iota in her numerous attempts to remember life before the moment of the accident. It's as if someone deliberately separated these two halves with an invisible line, and everything that came before was irretrievably lost. Her husband helped her as best he could, showing her a wedding album which contained many photographs of both the celebration itself and afterwards, from their everyday life. Here they are, happy and incredibly beautiful, posing for a photographer, surrounded by 24 friends. Victoria, she wore a gorgeous designer dress the color of baked milk, completely embroidered with silk and silver crystals that folded into a whimsical and slightly reminiscent of Scandinavian patterns. "You are so beautiful here." Kissing his wife, he whispered to Jack. I just gently dodged. She was not yet ready to get closer to her husband the way he would like. Too little time had passed, and she had not yet had time to get used to him again or feel the feelings that had connected them, as he claimed, for 3 long years. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, Victoria. But the husband did not seem to hear this, continuing to try to establish closer communication with his wife. He tried to hug her, but the woman pulled away, more insistent. "No, Jack, please, I can't. But I love you." He answered her stupidly, slightly upset Jack, by his face. The woman realized that he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, and now all he could do was look back at their wedding photos in disappointment. "Okay," he said dryly. "But did you remember anything? And you can't hide from me forever. After all, I am your husband. You don't need to be afraid of me. Maybe if we started living together again." As before, you would quickly be able not only to remember, but also to feel for me the same love that I feel for you every day. Victoria, I felt bad at heart. She really wanted all those wonderful, sublime feelings he spoke about to return to her memory. Jack, but looking at the multicolored photographs, she felt absolutely nothing for anyone, even the slightest glimpse of memory. Victoria, she was terribly ashamed, so she could. "That's what I thought," said the husband in a much colder tone. "Sometimes it seems to me that you don't even try to remember anything. I understand this is hard for you, but you could just try to trust me and your mom, since your memory still doesn't want to come back to you. Look at your right hand." Victoria, she obediently stared at her right hand, where her wedding ring with a huge pink diamond was on her ring finger. Jackie caught her glance and nodded curtly. "You see, I gave you this ring on the day I proposed to you. You were happy to receive it. So happy that she immediately told me yes. Jack, you." She tried to justify herself, but her husband motioned for her to shut up. "Please let me finish," he said, and a mournful expression instantly spread across his face. "You don't remember now, but you and I have always been part of one whole. We loved each other so much that we even wrote special vows for each other for our wedding." Jackie looked for something in my wife's toilet cabinet and took out a large envelope. Inside was a sheet of coated paper neatly folded in half. On the sheet of paper was a love letter typed on a typewriter in which Victoria explained her feelings to her future husband. "Here, read this carefully," her husband asked. "If this doesn't bring back even a little memory of how happy we were, Then I'm asking, no, I'm begging you, just take my word for it. I love you more than anything in the world, and it will always be that way. With these words, the man left his wife's room, leaving her alone with the wedding vows and his far from rosy thoughts. Victoria, I read the message to my husband and cried. She cried because she couldn't remember either how she wrote it or what she felt. The oath was truly beautiful, so pure, so sincere. Lord, why? I don't remember any of this. I asked both myself and God the same question. Why can't I love my husband again and remember? Her mother-in-law's advice didn't help either. Although they cooked together in the spacious kitchen and went out into the city together to visit the places that, as she assured her, Zoe loved most of all, it was all useless. Inside Victoria was as if there was a huge stone wall that did not allow her to look into the depths of her own memory and remember everything. Where in Victoria she was not left alone for a minute. Either her mother-in-law or herself was always with her Jack. My husband and I went to the city to unwind a couple of times a week. There they went shopping and to restaurants. Or Jack tried to spend time with his wife, visiting theaters, cinema, and exhibitions. She was very grateful to her husband for his work, but did not understand why she could not do everything the same, but on her own, without his. The woman wanted a little freedom, personal space. She hoped unsuccessfully that if she could be alone with her thoughts, then her memory might return to her much faster. No, honey, that's impossible. Repeated to her over and over again, Jack, you are still too weak and cannot fully control yourself. What if you get some kind of dizziness? Or, God forbid, will you completely lose consciousness and fall into a coma again? Darling, I won't survive this. You know, but I'll still have to go out in public alone sooner or later. You can't lock me in our house forever. Just thinking about it immediately made me shudder. She suddenly realized that, it turns out, she couldn't stand closed spaces and loneliness, Jack, but seeing his wife's reaction to his words, he instantly became nervous with irritation. The corner of his eye even twitched. What's happened, you? Did you remember something? He asked somehow strangely. No, she answered. Why are you asking? The husband immediately relaxed noticeably and said more softly, I thought you felt something new. Maybe she remembered how you and I already argued in a similar way. Victoria shook her head negatively. Oh, not really, but you're right. I realized that I couldn't be alone for too long. Then something seemed to push the woman from within, and she looked carefully at her husband, her Jack, and why during all this time, none of my friends ever called me. Do I have no friends? The phone number you gave me. There is no one in the contact list except you and Zoe. What about my parents? Where are they, Jack? There were so many questions that Jack involuntarily began to walk around the room where they were talking. It was just one of those evenings when they were planning to go to the premiere of the Capitol's play, which was touring their city. The man noticeably perked up and kept tugging at his cuffs in excitement, pretending to adjust his emerald cufflinks. What is it, dear? I didn't understand, Victoria. Is there something you haven't told me yet? Jack, I will not leave here until I find out the whole truth. Jackie looked nervously at his wife, and in her soul there was an unpleasant feeling, a feeling that they were clearly hiding something from her. It's just that you've chosen the wrong time for this conversation, he finally said. Jack, we're going to the theater now and you're here about your parents and friends. Let's talk later. I felt a sudden attack of anger and irritation. She stomped her foot hard on the carpet. But I want to know, have pity on me. I've been living in the dark for a year now and don't know who I am or what I am. I didn't ask because I thought it would be too hard for me and because I thought I would remember everything on my own. But nothing works. I don't know what to do next, how to get my memory back. Victoriashi felt herself begin to shake. She was clearly starting to get hysterical. And my husband, fortunately, also understood this. Jack jumped up to Victoria and hugged her tightly, trying to warm her and calm her trembling. It was like a stretched ringing string. She couldn't control her own body. He stroked his wife on the. That's what I was talking about. It's too early for you to be alone. I was hoping you could remember bits and pieces of the main thing. Her man sat her down on the bed and said in a soft but sad voice, Your parents, they died long ago. It was a hiking accident. Your mom and dad were mountain lovers and often kayaked in wild river areas. One day their boat couldn't withstand one of the rapids and capsized. She looked at her husband with red eyes from tears. Did they drown? He nodded sadly and stroked Victoria on the cheek. The river was very cold, and in those places the current was very strong. Their death was inevitable. I'm sorry, honey, I'm so sorry. Victoria burst into tears and buried her face in her husband's shoulder. Lord, what a nightmare. Oh, how long ago did this happen? Oh, a long time ago, honey. You were only 20 then. You told me about it yourself. Jack stroked his wife's head and whispered soothing words into her ear. Then he said carefully, I bought you a new phone because your previous one was broken during an accident. There are no other contacts in it, since I didn't want anyone to bother you again during your rehabilitation. Victoria calmed down a little and, wiping her tears, exactly. But I didn't even think about it. I'm sorry, Jack. I am very ashamed that I could think badly of you. I really decided that you wanted to hide something from me. The husband just smiled affectionately and suggested, if you want to meet your friends, then so be it. I'll tell them your new number. But just be sure to stay in touch. When I walk, I need to know that you're okay, you know. Nodded. This news made her feel a little lighter. Well, that's nice, the husband said contentedly. You know, I changed my mind about going to the theater today. I think we've had enough emotions for this evening. Let me give you the sedative the doctor prescribed, and then we'll go to bed early. Is that okay? I thought about it and agreed. She really is very emotional about you. The husband assured her that he was not at all offended by his wife's suspicion. Like, he understands everything. Still, living without a past is such stress. Having given my wife an injection, Jack breathed out a sigh of relief when she fell into a blissful sleep within a few minutes. That evening, he realized for the first time that he was with Victoria. There is still a long way to go before she finally comes to terms with the fact that her true place is in this house and in his, and only his. That same night, Victoria saw a very strange dream, which later I could not get out of my head. In that dream, she couldn't understand where exactly she was. Everything around her was engulfed in bright orange flashes, and the woman herself could not breathe, normally because of the smoke that had entered her lungs. Bitter and acrid, this smoke enveloped all the objects that the businessman's wife tried to reach in a fruitless attempt to save them from the approaching flame. I felt the ever-increasing heat on my skin, but did not see a way out of the smoky space. Then, as if out of nowhere, two blurry figures appeared in front of her. I couldn't see exactly what they looked like, but I felt that one of them, the taller one, was a man, and the second, very small, clearly belonged to a child. Victoria, I heard a strong male voice ahead of me. Where are you? Victoria. The voice repeated her name over and over again. She didn't try to quickly shout, I'm here, but not a single sound escaped her throat. In desperation, the woman grabbed her own neck and suddenly heard a piercing, childish voice, Mom, Mommy. And she began to rush around in the blinding, fiery fog, trying to reach, or at least get closer to those ghostly figures that were calling her. She understood in her soul that she definitely needed to give them a sign that she was here, that she was alive, and that everything was fine with her. However, the blurry silhouettes moved further away the closer I tried to get to them. Victoria, finally experiencing a surge of inhuman despair, the woman screamed into the void, watching the figures move away and dissolve in the smoke. Wait, please don't leave me here. No, I want to come to you. Wake up, called her Jack. And at that moment, the woman opened her huge blue eyes. It turned out that she was still lying in her bed, and her husband was sitting next to her, bending over her and forcefully shaking her shoulders so that she would wake up. Anxiety and sadness were clearly visible on the husband's face. What's wrong with you? What did you see? The wife, not yet fully awakened from what she had seen, just shook her head and pulled her husband's hands away from her. Oh, everything is fine, Jack. Nothing. I just had a nightmare. The young woman regained her breath with difficulty and looked tenderly at her husband. Don't worry. Give me a couple of minutes. Victoria turned on her other side, trying to cope with the feelings that rushed over her. What she saw in the dream was so vivid and realistic that the woman could not move away from the thought that it could very well be a memory. Just what? And why didn't she see in this strange dream Jack, as if he had nothing to do with it at all? Are you sure you don't need sedatives? I could get you some pills if you want. Looked at her husband with outright surprise. Are you serious, honey? Do you want to turn me into a vegetable? Jack tensed for a moment. but laughed lightly and threw a pillow at him. Yes, I was just joking, fool. Of course, I don't mean anything like that. Well, really, it's just a bad dream. There is no need to take pills every time I feel emotions. Jackie smiled, but somehow not joyfully, as if he felt guilty about something. However, quickly pretending that nothing had happened, he invited his beloved wife to drink coffee together. Even baked cheesecakes for us today before rushing off to work. As long as I have lived, I am always amazed at her amazing ability to combine the talents of a housewife and a businesswoman. God, how embarrassing. Pressing her hands to her face, she said, Victoria, it was I who had to get up early and prepare everything. Instead, you also have to strain your mother in the kitchen. Jackie just waved his hand, after which he tenderly kissed his wife on the cheek. You just don't know her as I do. In fact, all this amateur activity with pots has always been a joy for her. Before my father died, she was an ordinary housewife for a long time, raised me, looked after my dad when he came home from work. And then, when her father died of a heart attack, she took the business seriously. Dad left us some inheritance. She used this money to open her first beauty salon. Victoria looked at her husband with sincere interest. This was the first time he had told her so openly about his family. I was still just a boy then, about 17 years old. At first, I couldn't accept this new form of my mother. And then she clearly explained to me that in this life, you need to fight for yours to the end, gnawing it with your teeth, but not giving it to anyone. So I first entered college at the Faculty of Economics and then got a job in a bank. But gradually, I became one of the people and met you. Jack hugged with tenderness Victoria, and she allowed herself to be kissed for real. At some point, the woman thought that the dream she had was really just a meaningless nightmare. A couple of hours later, when the husband was already getting ready for work, the phone of Victoria suddenly burst out an insistent third. Looking at the screen, the woman was surprised to find that they were calling her from an unknown number. Pick up the phone, he advised her, Jack throwing his jacket over his shoulders. I'm sure you're happy about who's calling you. Really? Raised her eyebrows and answered the incoming call. It's you. An unfamiliar female voice squealed on the phone. Yes, it's Victoria. And who speaks? There was a second pause at the other end of the line, after which the same thin voice said, offended, Jack, of course. He said that you have problems with your memory, but so much so. Victoria looked at her husband again with the question, who is this? But he just winked at her and pointed to his watch. I'm in a hurry, he whispered with one lips. They hanged themselves there. After this, the husband went to work with a satisfied look, leaving Victoria in complete confusion. And she remembered that Zoe should come home in half an hour. Check on her and see if everything is okay. So, who should she have fun with? Her mother-in-law? Or the one who was literally tearing her phone to pieces? The caller continued to attack Victoria endless questions. Listen, don't you seriously remember us? It is me, Anne, your best friend. Yuzhiaki said that you can't get close to you while you're being treated. During this time, we were all exhausted. And yesterday, he writes to us and tells us to drag you into the city. No, well, you always had him, Mr. Spontaneity. Sorry, of course, for such frankness. Wait. Anne, stop. I tried to pacify my interlocutor. Do you want to say that you and I were once friends before the accident? I mean, are you my best friend? Confused by the appearance of another person in her life, whom she did not remember at all, she suggested Anne meet in the city center, in the very cafe where they usually like to go with their husband. The woman wanted to talk to this girl and try to remember her. Still, this one Anne so insisted that they had known each other for many years. However, the meeting with my friend was not impressive, Victoria, to say the least. Disappointed. Not only did she remember absolutely nothing of the things that this girl told her about, but Tanshi also turned out to be an extremely unpleasant girl in her own right. I couldn't believe that I trusted this nasty and envious girl with all my secrets. Yes, she would never share it with such a gossip. While they were sitting in the cafe, she managed to wash the bones of all their mutual friends. And although half of them Victoria didn't even see her, she was offended that and like this. Without hesitation, he throws mud at everyone. So you're saying that you and I work together in the modeling business? I asked at some point Victoria to interrupt her endless dirty tirade, and paused for a second. as if her internal computer was having a hard time processing this simple question. Finally, an uncertain smile appeared on her face. Yes, and don't you remember our shows in Milan? How we discussed this famous model? She looks so beautiful in all the magazines, but in reality, she is fact. I'm still amazed at what these agents saw in her. After all, the natural one was scary. Anne laughed unpleasantly, revealing her big white teeth. She continued thoughtfully, stirring the remains of her milkshake in a tall glass with a straw. Who do I love more, dogs or cats? I asked again. What? Swatting her long, thickly painted eyelashes, her friend stared at her. And what do cats have to do with it? Victoria looked at the girl carefully. But this is such a simple question. You say you've known me almost since school. Then you can't help but know which animals I love more. All best friends answer such questions with ease, especially when some of them have memory problems. What I definitely didn't expect was that, and suddenly, out of the blue, he pulls out his mobile phone and starts hysterically writing something to someone in it. What are you doing? I asked her with a smile. She wouldn't be surprised if now she was posting some nasty stuff about her on the internet, but she didn't care at all. She just wanted to understand what was going on here. And she finished fiddling with her smartphone, and with a changing grin, obviously intended to depict a smile. You know, I was urgently called here for filming. I would be glad to chat with you more, but unlike you, I don't have a rich husband, so I have to work hard. Yeah, and quickly jumped up from the table and said, Victoria, kiss. No, be upset. We'll definitely chat again later, and then you see, you'll feel better. Kiao dear, in touch. With these words, the red-haired gossip fled from the cafe like a bright but stupid butterfly. I couldn't get rid of the thought that with this end there was something wrong. Well, it can't be that she chose such a mercantile person as her friend. Besides, she definitely didn't know the answer to her question, and all this fuss with the phone. Yes, she was just looking for an excuse to quickly leave and not continue to dive into slippery topics. But what could this mean? Victoria were at a loss. She had too many questions about her own past, and she had not yet received an answer to any of them. Hearing her own phone vibrate in her purse, the woman immediately picked up the phone. Hello, honey? How are you? I asked Jack, who called her from work. To be honest, not really, his wife admitted to him. I didn't like it at all. What kind of friend is this, who has only clothes and gossip on her mind? Is it true? There was tension in the husband's voice. You don't have to communicate with her if you want. I just thought it would be useful for you to be with old acquaintances. You said it yourself. Yes, I remember, she hastened to reassure him. It's just that this meeting turned out to be not at all as sincere as I imagined. I'm going home now, Zoe already there. I could cook us all something original for dinner tonight. They chatted a little more about household chores, after which she hung up and walked home. She wanted to take a little walk to be alone with her thoughts and just relax in silence. The weather that day was simply wonderful. Spring was in full swing. Apple trees were blooming everywhere. The flower beds were full of blooming flowers. A sea of floral herbal aromas floated in the air, and Victoria lingered for a couple of minutes in one of the courtyards near the playground. Looking at the little happy children playing in the sandbox, I felt a surge of incredible melancholy. What a pity that Kalia and I don't have our own baby. This is how I could now sit and watch our son or daughter. Maybe my soul would then feel much calmer. The young woman sat down on the bench, watching the children with pleasure. Some of them were swinging happily on the swings while their mothers looked away with a proud look. Victoria, here, they say. Look, envy how happy we are growing. Suddenly, Victoria, she felt her hands and feet suddenly become cold. Something seemed to switch in the young woman's head, and she clearly, as if in reality, saw herself in her arms with a small child. The newborn snored sweetly. His eyes were closed. He slept. At that moment, I was absolutely sure that I was holding my own son in my arms. However, her vision did not end there. The woman felt strong and gentle arms hug her shoulders, turned around to look at the child's father, and it was he. And, to her great amazement, she saw in front of her not at all Jack. A tall, broad-shouldered, handsome man with deep dark green eyes and golden hair did not fit with the image of her husband. Jack was a stocky brunette, slender, but slightly taller than herself. This same stranger looked like he was a hero from an old fairy tale. She didn't know either the beautiful man or the child she was holding in her arms, but she was sure that both of them had the most direct relation to her. Really, Jack is there still something she's not telling her? Is it possible that before him Victoria was there another family? But then where are they? What happened to them? Intrigued, Victoria immediately hurried home. She eagerly awaited her husband's return so she could talk to him about her vision. Zoe, seeing how worried she was, she herself became nervous. Having seated her daughter-in-law in the kitchen, she tried to quickly ask her about what happened and how the meeting with her friend went. However, Victoria, at that moment, I was by no means in the mood for a sincere conversation with maybe I can help you with something. Looking in Victoria in the eyes, asked the businesswoman. Oh, I'm afraid that only Jack. She sighed. I need to talk to him very seriously. A shadow ran across the woman's face, the nature of which was impossible to determine. The young woman referred to the fact that she needed rest, after which she went upstairs to her room. That evening, when Jack came back home, Victoria immediately called him over and honestly told him about her sudden memory. After listening to his wife, the businessman was a little confused at first, but quickly pulled himself together. I was amazed at how quickly the reactions on his face changed. In a few moments, she managed to discern surprise, anger, confusion, and then an imperturbable calmness that hid all other feelings under ATSAT. Darling, listen to me very carefully. The husband began, placing his wife on the bed. What you are talking about is impossible, but why? She looked at him incomprehensibly. Jack, I feel that these people are somehow connected to me very strongly. These emotions, this image, it was so real, so familiar. If there is something that I don't know about myself, you just have to tell me Jackie covered his face with his hands, as if trying to isolate himself from his own feelings. The doctors warned me that such consequences were possible, he said slowly. You've been in a coma for too long, and part of your brain still remains not fully restored. What do you mean, Jack? I asked him again. What is wrong with me? The husband looked at her with sadness, even some guilt. Forgive me, I should have told you about everything earlier. What are you talking about? Can you explain? The husband carefully took Victoria by the hands. Her hallucinations. The doctor said that this is how the consequences of a coma can manifest themselves. Victoria couldn't immediately comprehend what her husband was telling her. When it dawned on her, she shook her head negatively. No, Jack, no. The fact of the matter is that it was not a figment of my imagination. I'm sure I saw part of my past, but I can't understand when it was and who these people are to me. Jack looked at his wife with inexpressible regret. Honey, it happens sometimes. Perhaps you experienced a powerful emotional shock when you looked at your children. So your mind tried to deceive you, to pass off wishful thinking as reality. No, she continued to persist. I know for sure that I have seen these people before. Jack, I didn't tell you about my dreams. That nightmare. My husband guessed right away. Yes, she nodded. Victoria, it seems to me that I saw the same man and boy there, only it seemed to be later than the memories on the playground. There's a face here. Jack, it immediately became dark. Victoria, let's not try to find an explanation for your nonsense. Of course, I'm not very pleased that you see some strange man in your visions, but as for the child, she jumped out of bed and threw out her hands nervously. Yes, I also wanted to ask why we still don't have children. You just said that the memory could have been triggered by children playing. What did you mean? Instead of answering, the husband slowly rose from the bed, after which he calmly walked to a small cabinet with medicines and took out a syringe with a sedative. Noticing this, she stepped back. No, Jack, I don't want a sedative. Explain to me how those kids and my visions are connected. Jack, what are you doing? The young woman's eyes filled with pure horror as her husband began to advance on her, holding a ready injection in his hand. His face was completely impenetrable. Honey, everything is fine. Don't worry. You just need to calm down a little. Look at you, you're shaking all over. Victoria retreated further and further until she finally felt something hard under her back. It was a wall. The young woman's heart filled with panic. She turned around, trying to find a way out, but at that moment, her husband suddenly grabbed her hands, making it impossible to resist. Jack, please don't. I don't want to. I'm scared. Jackie pulled his wife to him, with force and in one deft movement, stuck a syringe with a sedative into her neck. "Don't be afraid, honey, don't be afraid. Everything is fine. I will never let you go. Never. We will always be together." Before your eyes, Victoria, everything immediately floated away. The room was instantly filled with fog. When Jackie unclenched his embrace and carefully laid her on the bed, the woman looked at him with a completely blank look. "Honey, we don't have children because you're barren." The husband said unexpectedly affectionately. "I didn't want to talk about it so as not to traumatize your already fragile psyche. However, now I see that we cannot do without it. I'll have to call you a psychotherapist tomorrow. He will prescribe you a new course of medications, and you will definitely improve everything." She didn't know what kind of drug her husband was injecting her with, but she was sure that it was definitely not a sedative, more like tranquilizers. Suddenly it flashed through the woman's head, somewhere on the farthest border of her consciousness between sleep and reality. "We also gave these to horses on our farm." Victoriashi didn't have time to grasp onto this thought because everything around her suddenly plunged into darkness. She woke up only the next morning. Jackie wasn't nearby, so I carefully slipped into the shower to wash away the remnants of sleep in a semi-conscious state caused by strange medication. Lord, didn't I really dream all this? I thought, Victoria standing in front of powerful jets of hot water. Did I really remember something that Kalia didn't like, and that's why he did this to me? The woman shuddered with disgust. I remembered the terrible expression that flashed on my face, Jack, the moment he gave her the injection. God, he looked like he was crazy. I can't stay in this house next to him anymore. I need answers. Slipping out of the bathroom, Victoria, I got dressed and carefully went down to the first floor. The woman heard people quietly talking about something in the kitchen, Jack and his mother. To the surprise of Victoria, the conversation between relatives was conducted in French, and listening to their speech, I realized with amazement that I understood them perfectly. It was only when the words took on their full meaning for her that she was forced to slowly slide down the wall, sitting on the floor. Her legs refused to restrain the woman, instantly becoming weak from shock. "Did I tell you that you were taking risks?" Reproached Eisen. "You're just making fun of the girl in vain." Today she remembered her son, and tomorrow, God forbid, she'll talk about Pablo will remember. What will we do then if the whole truth is revealed? Speak more quietly. Shouted at her Jack French. I myself don't know why this happened. Doctor said that the effect of the drugs was 100. She shouldn't have remembered anything from her past at all. Nothing that happened to her before. Zoe, she shook her head doomedly. Do you even understand what you did? Son, you ruined her whole life. And now you continue to do the same. She will never love you. She will never be able to. Her attachment to them is too... No, Mom. Unable to restrain himself, the businessman shouted loudly, Victoria mean and only mine understand. They lost her, and I won't let you separate us. Come to your senses, Jack. I begged him, Zoe. If you don't stop now, it will only get worse. Do you really want a wife who has the memory of a fish? She really will go crazy soon. Is this what you are trying to achieve? For a moment, a painful pause hung between mother and son. And then I heard how Jack dialed someone's number on his phone. He never muted the keyboard, so the numbers and letters squeaked every time he touched them. What are you doing? Asked him coldly, Zoe, already in English. Oh, I call the attending physician Victoria. He answered calmly, No, do not dare. His mother whispered threateningly to him, I'm not going to participate in this farce anymore. So it was only for your sake that I endured. Don't worry, Mom, I'll solve everything, he said confidently. Jack, after which he began a conversation with someone whom Victoria I haven't heard it anymore. However, this was enough for the woman, covering her mouth with her hand. So as not to scream in fear, she barely rose to her feet and quickly walked back to her room. There, the businessman's wife hastily threw some spare clothes and personal belongings into her backpack. Victoria, it was necessary to wait for the moment when Jack will go to the airport. A couple of days ago, he told his wife that he was going on a very important business trip to London. This business trip was for Victoria I's only chance to save your own life. The woman heard her husband's steps on the stairs and quickly stuffed the backpack under the bed, lay back down and pulled the blanket up to her chin pretending that she wanted to lie down a little longer. "Here you are," he said with a smile, Jack, entering the room. "It's almost 10 a.m. It's time to get up." The man affectionately stroked his wife on the head, and she hardly squeezed out a response smile. It's just that yesterday, the day ended so unexpectedly. She pretended that she hardly remembered the previous evening. She stretched sweetly and put her hands on her husband's shoulders. He shouldn't have suspected anything. Therefore, she played her role well, albeit through force. "I'm leaving today, remember?" I asked her, Jack. And Victoria nodded in agreement. "Mom will look after you until the doctor comes," the husband continued. And at the same second on the back Victoria called, prickly goosebumps appeared. "Behave yourself and do everything the doctor tells you, okay? And I will try to return as soon as possible. I think in 10 days, no more." Heart in the chest Victoria very clogged. 10 days, she will have almost 2 weeks to carry out. "Oh, so long. She asked out loud, desperately pretending to be an exemplary wife. But I'll have time to get bored." Instead of an answer, Jack kissed his young wife. "That's great," he said with a satisfied smile. "I like you much better this way and forget about everything we talked about yesterday. I love you either way, with or without children." She nodded in response and smiled radiantly. As soon as the businessman left the house, the woman immediately jumped out of bed and continued to get ready. Taking some cash from the box, she shook out all the jewelry. "Victoria, I felt like I was ready, no matter what her husband was planning. If he was her husband at all, she did not intend to stay in this house for another minute. She herself will find answers to all her questions and will finally find out who she is and how she ended up in this golden dungeon." Seizing the right moment, she slipped out through the emergency exit leading to the garage. And from there, she slowly made her way through the gate to freedom. As soon as the young woman crossed the threshold of the estate, everything in her soul literally began to sing. I thought to myself, "Victoria, there is nothing better or more expensive than this." Having reached the city by bus, I immediately went to an inconspicuous but decent hostel, about which I had managed to look up information in advance. And she needed to hide in a place where Jackie didn't find her right away. That is why any option with a hotel or a luxury hotel was immediately accepted. First of all, she didn't have enough money to pay for a room there. Secondly, I wanted to use my husband's bank cards to a minimum. She understood perfectly well that as soon as he discovered her absence, the first thing he would do was check the cards. Having settled down in the micro number allotted to her, Victoria, I opened my laptop and started looking first for information about myself, and only then for all the psychologists in the city who, in one way or another, used hypnosis methods in their work. As she thought, there wasn't much information about her husband's family on the internet, and most of it was on Jack and his mother. True, she did find several messages about their wedding. However, there were no details or photographs from the celebration in these short notes. This is all strange, she thought to herself. Usually, when some big shot gets married, journalists are right there, but this was clearly not our case. Having finished her mini investigation, the young woman switched to searching for a hypnotist. She was able to find one private Victoria, where a professor of psychology worked, practicing the method of aggressive hypnosis. Having changed clothes and pretending that she was really rich and wealthy, the lady went to the address indicated on the website. The psychologist turned out to be a pleasant, elderly man, about 60 years old. Looking carefully at Victoria, he asked, "Sorry, maybe I'm interfering with my own business. However, as a specialist who deals with problems of consciousness, I still need to know why exactly do you need hypnosis and therapy sessions? What do you expect from them?" Victoria answered, not at all embarrassed. "I want to get my memory back. About a year ago, I was in an accident and fell into a long-term coma. This resulted in amnesia." The professor's gray eyebrows involuntarily flew up. "Really, I'm sorry, I didn't know. But wait, you say you came out of the coma a long time ago. Why then don't you remember anything?" Victoria, I hesitated for a minute, thinking how best to explain the whole situation to the psychologist. Finally, "It's not that I don't remember certain moments. The problem is that I don't remember my life before the accident. Absolutely nothing." The professor looked at her somewhat surprised. "Oh, that's how it is. Oh, but this is impossible." Finished for him. I wanted to say, "It's very strange, but your option is also quite suitable. The doctor said with a soft smile. There are, however, some things, but they flash only for a fraction of a moment, and then again become almost intangible. She spoke quietly, Victoria, and told the psychologist about her visions and dreams. George, that was the doctor's name, he agreed to help with interest, Victoria, since this was the first time I encountered such an interesting case. He assured the worried woman that the hypnosis sessions were absolutely safe for her psyche, and she should not worry about anything. The only thing I have to warn you about, said George, don't expect a lightning-fast effect. Sometimes it may take up to 6 to 8 sessions for a person to remember and restore missing memory block, and sometimes everything works out almost the first time. It all depends on the depth of psychological trauma that you appear to have suffered during the accident. It was she who made your memory block something that still hurts you, and Victoria nodded at him, although she was incredibly worried about what she could remember. But as soon as they started their first session with the psychologist, then it was their turn. George, be a lot of surprise. Oh, I'll be honest with you, this is my first time with a patient like you, he honestly admitted to the young woman. Usually I can pull out from my consciousness at least something related to early childhood or adolescence. But you, the psychologist spread his hands and smiled slightly confused. You are like a blank sheet of paper, a notebook with only white blank pages inside. Victoria felt the blood gushing from her face. Is that possible? The doctor thought for a moment and nodded. Yes, but only if during treatment you were treated with potent drugs in sufficient quantities. They can not only destroy memory, but also completely erase the identity of the person taking them. If this is possible, I would like to see your medical record. This would help us shed light on everything that is happening. Victoria Zadley shook her head. I'm afraid it is impossible. My husband probably has the card, and we are, let's say, not on the best terms right now. In response to this, the psychologist only shrugged his shoulders. Well, then we can only hope that your memory will gradually relax and release all the information you need. She returned to the hostel that day very disappointed. What the doctor said. After all, it could very well be true. Jack never told her about the methods that doctors used on her in an effort to restore the functioning of her brain. A week passed and she still didn't remember anything. Although 3 sessions had already passed, Georgie tried to use different approaches, even going as far as art therapy. All just so that at least the slightest glimpse of memories appears inside the head. But it was all in vain. At some point, Victoria even almost resigned myself to the fact that for some reason I would never be able to remember my life before the accident. However, the doctor assured her that it was too early to give up. I'm sure that we can achieve at least some result, the psychologist insisted. Victoria, I almost lost hope. The saddest thing is that I no longer saw flashes in which that mysterious man and little boy would appear. Was it really just a figment of imagination? In despair, the woman thought about this, wiping tears from the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief. After all, she so wanted to believe that it was these people who carried the key to her personality and past life. At the 3rd session, something strange happened, and when the psychologist had already put the woman into a trance, a fire alarm suddenly went off above them in the office. The smoke detector began to make a heart-rending squeak, and George jumped up from the table in surprise. Victoria felt a strange feeling, as if something similar had happened to her before. Since she could not get out of the trance without the help of a psychologist, she tried with all her might to cling to this feeling of déjà vu, hoping that it would at least lead her to something, and she succeeded. The fog in which I had been wandering during the hypnosis sessions, all this time suddenly began to dissipate. Images from the past flashed before the woman one after another. They fell upon her with such furious force that it seemed that if it could be described physically, then Victoria was literally knocked off my feet by the strongest water flow, which all these months had been held back by an artificial dam of chemicals. Victoria suddenly felt short of breath, and she tried to open her mouth wide to breathe, when at that very moment I felt the acrid, bitter smoke. And inhaling this smoke in my memories, Victoria finally remembered everything. Her real name was Victoria, but her last name was different, and Jack was not her husband at all. Just a little over a year ago, the woman had a completely different, absolutely happy life. Her real husband's name was Pablo, and he really was the same broad-shouldered, handsome man from her knowledge. Pablo is a businessman specializing in the agricultural segment. Simply put, Victoria had his own huge farm in another city, and also a small breeding laboratory, where she herself bred new varieties of flowers and some types of other plants. Victoria, I've never worked as a model. The woman remembered that she had a biological education behind her. She learned French while still a student on a course 5 years ago. He even lied about her husband's parents. They really died, but not at all in the way he described. There was no sign of anyone going there. I was just a very late child with my mother and father. They were already over 40 when the girl was born. Mother Victoria died of a stroke when Victoria turned 19. My father died much later as a result of a fishing accident. The man fell through the ice and died from hypothermia. So there is not a single word of truth in the words of the imaginary husband Victoria. Never happened. Pablo Theodore, the woman whispered in a trance. My dears, how could I live so long without you? Where are you, my dear ones? Theodore is the name of their little 3-year-old son, whom the couple loved more than anything in the world. Pablo and Victoria could be called an ideal couple. Their life was also the same until he appeared in a Jack. I remembered very clearly the day his SUV appeared in the driveway in front of their farm gate. He introduced himself as a major investor and told her husband that he would like to get acquainted with his farm since he had heard a lot about their environmentally friendly agricultural products. Pablo didn't mind showing the farm. However, he was indecently angry at the thought that some city businessman who had never been familiar with his business would suddenly decide, out of the blue, that he could dictate to him. The businessman imposed his terms on them on the grounds that he had invested a certain amount of money in their production. However, Jack was very persistent, and all the time while his husband was giving him a tour, the banker painted rosy prospects for their company entering the international market. At the end of the day, Pablo, being a very sincere and decent person, invited Jack to drink tea at their house, and then Jack saw it for the first time at Victoria. The young woman, in no word or deed, gave the city investor any reason to hope for anything more than simple cordiality and politeness. However, Jack, amazed by the truly rare beauty of Victoria, firmly decided to win the woman from her legal husband. I remembered that even then this love of his looked more like some kind of strange obsession. That evening, Jack literally didn't let me down. Victoria and Pablo, being far from stupid, noticed this immediately. Victoria Petrovna, I think I'll come see you next week, if you don't mind, of course. I want to show you the company's development plan, with which I am sure you will have every chance of becoming one of the most popular farms in the whole country in the shortest possible time. Well, let's see, he answered evasively. Pablo, let's not get ahead of ourselves, Jack. After all, everything you see around you belongs to me. As the owner, I have the right to have the last word. At this moment, the tall, green-eyed man looked expressively first at Jack and then to his wife. He, embarrassed, went into the kitchen under the pretext that she still needed to wash the dishes for the guests. She did not hear any further dialogue, but she clearly saw through the window how a guest coming out of their yard furiously kicked an old bucket that was standing in their yard, after which he walked to his expensive car and, getting into its interior, loudly slammed the door. When the businessman raised his face for a second, I managed to see that he was distorted by an eerie expression, exactly the same as he had on the day he placed Victoria that terrible prick. What did you say to him? She asked with alarm. Pablo, when he entered the kitchen. She didn't like that abnormal sparkle in her eyes. Jack, nothing special. The husband answered with a slight grin. Don't worry, darling, these are our men's affairs. He has nothing to be offended about, believe me. She tucked her lace shawl tighter, looking at the investor's UV that had disappeared in the distance. I don't like him, she admitted honestly then. There's something so dangerous about him. Pablo laughed lowly and gently hugged his wife to him. Don't be afraid, Victoria. This city whip will come here one more time or two when he realizes that he has nothing to catch here, and he'll fall back to his capital. Husband Victoria was right, and Jack indeed. He came to their farm 3 more times, and his last meeting with him, Pablo, and the man had a big quarrel, and because of her, because of Victoria. A man seized the moment when Pablo asked, not nearby, forcefully pressed his young wife against the wall of the greenhouse where the woman was working that day. I didn't even have time to shout before Jack literally attacked her with kisses. "Yeah, darling, sweet," he whispered, trying to leave numerous marks of his lips on her face. "But you are a real queen. Why are you living with an idiot like this, Pablo? Come with me to the city, and you will have everything you want. Cars, money, jewelry. Just be mine, and you should be mine." Experienced an almost physical attack of faintness, trying to push this clingy businessman away from you. She somehow freed herself from his grip and grabbed the box scoop that was lying nearby. "I love my husband. Our child is growing. Aren't you ashamed to behave this way? My husband let you into our house, and you allow yourself such monstrous things." Jack smiled, raising his hands conciliatorily, and was about to move to the side of Victoria a couple of steps. But she expressively waved the sharp blade of a scoop in front of his nose. "Oh, get out of here. Until I told my husband everything, and you don't need to tell me anything, my dear. I see everything already." A voice sounded behind Karpov's back. "Pablo, what about you, Jack? Are you really behaving like a brute?" With these words, in one sitting, he rigged Kajdi by the collar and escorted the businessman out into the yard, after which he forcefully threw him to the ground. "What do you allow yourself?" almost screamed Jack, trying to get up from the ground. "How dare you? Yes, I will not leave your farm unturned. Don't let me see you here again, you mummered pheasant," he shouted at him in a stern voice. "Pablo, otherwise I'll pull out both legs, hang it on a stick instead of a stuffed animal, and put it in my garden. You'll scare the crows." The businessman's face took on that same crazy expression, seasoned with feelings of anger and his own powerlessness. The giant man looked at him as if a well-fed cockroach was crawling in front of him, who was also trying to swing his license, trying to eat from the human table. "You have 10 seconds to get into the car and leave my farm forever," said in a threatening voice Pablo. "Otherwise, you can blame yourself. So 10-9, you will still be with me." I shouted for the last time, Jack, literally crawling into his car. "You just don't understand yet. You should be with me, Victoria. You should be mine." Pablo pretended to take a swing at the businessman, but he had already started the engine, and a minute later was driving out of their yard. Trembling, she clung to her husband, and he calmed her down for a long time, promising his wife that she would never see this scoundrel again. Victoria, then, I prayed that it would be so. But deep inside, she still had some bad feeling. People like Jack never deviates from what he wants. And very soon the family had to verify this. In just a few days, Victoria, I woke up at night to the strong smell of smoke and the frightened screams of my son. Jumping out of bed, the woman saw with horror how 3 huge big men in masks burst into the room where she was sleeping, along with her husband. She screamed, but the answer was deathly silence. Having managed to look out the window, she saw with horror how their beautiful wooden house was being devoured by fiery flames. A fiery hell reigned everywhere, and the husband and son were not nearby. Victoria didn't understand what happened and where her whole family was. However, with her loud screams, the woman attracted the attention of those same bandits. Well, that's where she was. "Look," one of them wheezed and began to slowly approach her. "Come on, grab her quickly." The chief ordered her to be taken straight to the hospital. There, they say, people who already know will take care of it. "No," she screamed heart-rendingly when 2 thugs roughly grabbed her by the arms and dragged her to the stairs leading down. She resisted and resisted with all her might. But how could she defeat such thugs? "Be quiet, you chicken." One of them slapped her in the face, and she involuntarily fell silent, curling up into a ball in pain. After these words, Victoria, I felt something very thin and sharp in my neck. Needle, she managed to think before passing out. "They are trying to poison me with something." I remembered everything else very vaguely. The faces of some doctors in white medical masks were bending over her, and from time to time, a satisfied face appeared. Jack. Apparently, he initially sent her to some private clinic where they treated her so well that they completely erased the young woman's memory of her past family and life. "Victoria," I heard someone's voice through the memories. "Victoria, wake up. Listen to my voice. Wake up to the count." She suddenly opened her eyes and sat down on the couch where she had been lying all this time, immersed in her own memories. George, it turned out I remembered everything, from the excitement of the hands Victoria shook with small tremors. But still, she was happy that she got her memory and personality back. Victoria, you screamed like that while you were in a trance. The psychologist began in confusion. I didn't understand much of what you said, but it's obvious that you were having a dialogue with someone. The woman stood up and warmly thanked the elderly doctor. Thank you, Professor. I can't explain everything to you now, but I very urgently need to go to one place to make sure that everything I saw is real. Just don't forget to look at me again later. We need to fill out some paperwork regarding the work done. Necessarily. She firmly shook his hand and assured him. And now, excuse me, but I really need to go. The psychologist could not hold his client. He just smiled and wished her luck. Oh, I'm glad you were able to find yourself again. That's all he said. Me too. She nodded to him. Victoria, if it weren't for you and this fire alarm, I don't even know what would have happened to me next. Pushing from the psychologist straight to the station, Victoria waited for the first train going to her city and jumped inside. Having reached the station she needed, the woman went straight to the bus stop and from there went to her native farm. When she approached the gates of the place that had been her home for many years, her heart, Victoria, I wanted to scream from pain and hopelessness. Her house, all buildings and personal experimental greenhouses, Victoria, all this was destroyed by fire. The fire was so strong that absolutely nothing remained of the former greatness of the agricultural complex, except huge black spots, ashes and pieces of charred. Falling to her knees in front of the ashes that were once her home, Victoria burst into tears, no longer able to contain the feelings that had been accumulating in her for so long. The worst thing was that she never found out what happened to her family, her real family. At that moment, a roar of an engine was heard not far from the woman, and a few minutes later the subject was already standing in front of the half-collapsed farm gate. "Saucc, are you out of your mind?" An angry man attacked her. What does it mean? Because of you, I left London 3 days early. When my mother called me and said that you had disappeared, and she was almost crawling up the wall with work for so long, I was afraid to talk about your escape. And you sit here admiring the ashes. Jack approached the woman and forced her to look at him. Victoria raised her eyes to him, dark as the sky before a thunderstorm. She slowly rose from her knees and struck Jack in the face. "Not dare," she said quietly, looking at her tormentor with hatred. "Don't you dare tell me what to do. You destroyed my family." He looked at him in amazement, Victoria, but she didn't let him say a word. "Yes, I remembered everything. How could you do this to me? You're not even my husband. You are nobody. You just got into our family like a bug, like a rat, and completely destroyed everything. Everything we have." Pabla built with such labor, began to choke on sobs, but intended to express. "Jack, everything I thought. I know that there was no accident. You just handed me over to some private hospital and poisoned me there with all sorts of rubbish so that I would completely forget everything. Where's my family, bastard? Where is the husband? Where is my son?" With every question, I beat Jack fist in the chest, trying to take out all the pain of his heart torn to shreds. Finally, Karpov caught both her hands and pushed Victoria. The woman fell backwards into dust and ash, which seemed to be firmly ingrained into the local soil. Yes, I took it for you, pulled you out of this village swamp, and showed you a normal human life, because you were created for such a life, and not for all this. Jackie gestured around the ruins of the farm. "If you want to know, I hope to the last that you would not try to find out something about your past. I thought my love was enough for both of us. God, how wrong I was." Jack slowly walked around Victoria like a predator its prey. "I even set this house of yours on fire, along with your not very pleasant husband and your entire complex. I hoped that if there was not even a reminder of who you once were, you would finally think and choose me and our wonderful life together." Victoria, everything was shaking, but she held on with all her strength. "Scoundrel. You," as she shouted to him. "I'll write a statement against you. They'll put you in prison." Jack just smiled unpleasantly. "Oh, nobody will prove anything." "My sweet, how did you find me?" I asked in despair. "Were you following me?" Jack grinned. "I figured out where you are from that tiny tracking device I placed in your phone. As soon as I arrived here, I immediately rushed here. Where did you want to spend these few days? When I learned that you went to a psychologist, I realized that anything could happen, so I went straight for you. The man did around Victoria one more lap. If you really want to know where your child is, then I will answer. He is in an orphanage. I just don't know which one. I ordered my people to throw your boy to them. And don't even tell me where, so that you don't have the opportunity to find him later if something goes wrong. She slowly rose to her feet, looking at him with all the hatred she could muster. You're a monster, she spat in his face. We will never be together, even if you remain the last man on earth. Even if you looked at me, I have all my memory and I won't remember my own name. We will never be together. Do you hear? Never. Because I hate you and I will always feel this hatred in my heart. How I felt that you were nobody to me. How I felt that I had Pablo, a man whom I will love with all my heart always, even after his death. Exhausted, she bent over and expected that the businessman would probably just want to kill her now. But to her great amazement, the face Jack distorted by a grimace of real mental pain. However, this only lasted for a moment before contempt flashed in his eyes again. Stupid. What a fool you were, Victoria. I gave you everything. I gave myself all to you, and you, an ungrateful, hysterical woman, for some reason got involved in something that you should not have known at all. Jack kicked the woman forcefully in the stomach, and Victoria immediately gasped in pain. Midges flashed in her eyes. Sorry, he said, pulling out the barrel. Did you ask for it yourself? Me, if only you would listen to me and not your stupid heart. Everything could be completely different now. Victoria, realizing that the inevitable ending was coming for her, closed her eyes and whispered quietly, Pablo, darling, I'm coming to you, my beloved. And at that same second, she felt a shadow fly past her. There was a roar, but the woman did not feel anything. She only cowered in horror. Opening her eyes, she saw someone big and strong striking Jack blows one after another, knocking the barrel out of his hands. You bastard, take it. She heard a painfully familiar, quiet voice. Pablo May, not believing her ears, she said, Victoria, you, is it really you? Pablo knocked out the villain, slowly recovered and turned to his wife. Rushing to his wife, he grabbed the police in his arms and tenderly squeezed them in his arms, exhausted by sobs. Everything is all right, my dear. Now everything will definitely be fine. I'm alive. He's alive too. He nodded towards the scoundrel. Don't worry, this bastard will still live. He's only now in the cell. I filmed everything on video, how he mocked you and what he said about our farm here. I think this will be quite enough for the police. And Victoriashi carefully pulled away from her husband. Pablo, tell me what happened then. How did you manage to get out of the house? Hey Theodore, did you hear what he said about our son? The giant man stroked his beloved's cheek and smiled tenderly at her. Nay, calm down, son. At home, we now live in another city. I couldn't stay here knowing you were dead. But in any case, that's exactly what I thought then. Rapla told Victoria that he managed to get out of the burning house in time when he discovered that everything around was on fire. They stunned me, Emboliety. I saw how they were trying to get into the house, so I wanted to fight them off. But they turned out to be strong, the bastards. I woke up already in the back room. Apparently, they hoped that I would burn there alive and burn, but they didn't know that we had a small passage there. I accidentally blocked it with garden tools, and it seemed like I couldn't see it from the inside. Pablo looked around to see if everything was Jack, that is, whether he came to his senses. Fortunately, he remained unconscious. I got out through him. First, he broke the glass, and then he unrolled the boards to make it more convenient. Explained to my wife Pablo. After that, his look became incredibly sad. He hugged again Victoria. She answered him, I buried you, Victoria. He said slowly, When the fire was put out, all I found was your bracelet and ring. I thought you just died in the flames. No, they put me to sleep and took me away. You heard? Yes. And he will have to answer for this in court. You'll see, the man assured her, righteous anger burning in his eyes at that moment. I found my son almost immediately. I couldn't believe that they were ready to send a guiltless child to the next. These thugs are not as smart as their owner expected them to be. Her husband explained to her, they sent our son to the first nearest orphanage. I didn't even have to go to the neighboring region. He took it right away. He, of course, was pretty scared, but it's okay, he's a strong guy. He says, I was waiting for you to come for me. I believed that you would take me away from bad people. Victoriache no longer restrained her emotions and kissed her lawful husband deeply. "Take me to our home, please," his wife asked. "I really want to see my son, and I really want to be with you in our new home." Pla smiled, and wrinkles gathered in small groups at the corners of his eyes. "Of course, my beloved. Let's just call the police first. It wouldn't do to just leave this gentleman like that." When the outfit arrived, Pablo explained everything to them in detail and showed them the recording. The investigator was shocked to learn that such an influential person could commit such a monstrous crime because of a banal obsession with a woman, even one as beautiful as she was. Victoria, now, to the false husband Victoria faces a long prison sentence. His mother, having learned about what had happened, immediately left for another city. She no longer wanted to help her son with his crimes. "You made the mess yourself, now clean it up yourself," she said. Goodbye, Jack. Pablo and Victoria returned to their new home, located in a neighboring town. Pablo, who had lost almost everything, did not lose heart. He hoped that eventually he could build a new farm for their family and start over. He still has connections with some of his former employees, so he has no doubts about success. Theodore, having learned that his mother was alive, he took it for a real miracle. The baby, who is almost 5, now lights a candle at home because he loves her very much and missed her very much. All this time until Victoria was actually in captivity of the businessman. The family is back together and now truly happy. After all, they were able to pass such tests that not every person has to endure. Victoria Ashe sincerely believes that only devotion and faith in her heart helped her ultimately remember her beloved husband and son and rediscover herself.